Good morning. Good morning, Commissioners. Chief Moore, Mr. Tiefenk, Madam Secretary, Mr. Inspector General Mark Smith, Mr. City Attorney Carlos De La Guerra, and members of the public. Today is Tuesday, September 20th, 2022. It is 9:30 a.m. and this is a special meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning, Commissioner Briggs,
Present.
Commissioner Decker,
Present.
Commissioner Bonner,
Here.
Commissioner Kalanche,
Here.
Commissioner Sobroff.
Here.
Thank you. Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. Also present, we have the Executive Director, the Chief of Police, the Inspector General, and the City Attorney. Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We welcome everyone attending this meeting. All public comment will be heard during item 2 on the agenda. We will dedicate a total of 45 minutes to public comment. Members of the public will have 1 minute per agenda item for a maximum of 2 minutes total. At the request of the speaker will be given 1 additional minute for general public comment for a maximum of 3 minutes total. Members of the public who participate in public comment are reminded that they can speak to any item on the agenda or a matter within the jurisdiction of the Board of Police Commissioners. Public comment is your opportunity to address the board, so you are free to express your opinion on matters before the board and to generally express when you disagree with the opinions of others expressed. However, directing your comments to other individuals who have spoken or attacking others who have expressed their opinions shall be deemed off topic and your public comment period will be concluded. Members of the public, if you choose to participate in public comment portion of the agenda, you can participate in this meeting in one of a number of ways that are outlined on your agenda. At this time, we're going to go to item number 1 on the agenda, the report of the Chief of Police. Good morning, Chief Moore.
Morning, Commissioner President Briggs, Commissioner Vice President Decker, Commissioner Sobroff, Commissioner Bonner, Mr. City Attorney, Mr. Tiefenk, Mr. Inspector General. As I do each week, I'm going to comment on our COVID-19 update, significant events, including an officer-involved shooting, and then crime stats and personnel strengths. But before I go there, I want to first draw attention and extend to Mark Smith, the Office of the Inspector General, his entire staff, the department's deepest condolences with the loss of the Assistant Inspector General, Camelia Nugent. Camelia was a decades-long employee, a significant member within the Office of the Inspector General, a woman that I enjoyed working alongside. She came in 2012 to the department, to the Office of Inspector General as a special investigator, rose through the ranks, working various assignments within your office. And I found her research, her efforts to investigate and determine the compliance, the performance of this organization to be balanced, to be factual, and to be professional. Her tone and her approach was always one of demonstrating professionalism and a real sincere desire to see this department excel in its mission and represent its best values. We'll miss her. And again, just on behalf of the entire organization, our deepest condolences following her loss after this long illness and the tragic circumstance. With that,
I appreciate it. Thank you for the mention. It means a lot. Thank you.
Let me move next to our COVID-19 update. We are continuing to see a week-to-week reduction in the number of new COVID-19 positive cases. This last week, we had a total of 19 additional new cases. That's a 21% reduction from the week previously reported. That's 7,190 of our sworn and civilian professional work class personnel. The vaccination rate of those that were new COVID-19 cases was 68%, with 13 of the 19 cases being employees that have been fully vaccinated. I'm happy to report that we continue to see a reduction in the number of personnel that are at home recovering from this. We now have 83 of our personnel recovering. That number was 136 last report, a reduction of 39%. 53 of our personnel are back at work from this. However, we still have 17 long haul cases, and unfortunately this last week, 2 of those cases involve individuals who have been re-hospitalized, continue to struggle with the long-term and dramatic impact it has on various aspects of their health. I'm happy to report that both of them are are in the hospital, but they do have a optimistic and a promising prognosis as far as them transitioning from the hospital and their continued effort to recover from this terrible disease. Next, I'll talk about our events and significant events. I want to thank members of the LGBTQ plus community who joined us on our Community Policing Academy last Tuesday night. I was able to go to the inaugural session where over the next 10 weeks, this group of individuals will be here to work with us and be exposed to the various elements of the department's operations, all of our various major operations, as well as they understand that the purpose, the strategies, the tactics that we use as we go about policing the second largest city in the country, as well as to hear from them, their input and feedback as to those operations and how those operations have impacted the various members and aspects of the LGBTQ plus community. It's been, I believe, a number of years, some of it impacted by the instances of COVID, but since we've been able to hold such an academy, and I was fortunate to have and recognize them for being there, and I look forward to seeing their graduation after their participation. The following day, I participated in the Chief of Police community forum regarding the Muslim community. It was held at a mosque in the Rampart area, Olympic area actually of the city, where faith leaders gathered, and we had a good conversation, broke bread, and enjoyed an evening to talk about mutual interests and our efforts to ensure that the various members within the Muslim community understand and feel protected, as well as we identify instances of hate, our strategies to hold those individuals accountable, and how those investigations are conducted. Following day, I participated in a South Park Community Safety Partnership Bureau town hall meeting and gathered there with a number of community members, and we spent that evening again talking about the strengths and also challenges and opportunities within that South Park area. Following day, the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce, I had a public safety meeting with various advocates within the Hollywood Chamber and business, as well as property owners and residents in that area. And it was a good conversation again about the opportunities, also the challenges that we've seen these last few years in regards to the COVID, as well as instances of homelessness and the impact that's had. But I also want to recognize the advances that are being made, particularly in regards to sensitive areas and the outreach and engagement by Councilman O'Farrell and others to get needed services to persons experiencing homelessness and shelter and transitioning them from very dangerous conditions of being unsheltered. Lastly, we had two categorical uses of force investigations, one involving a tactical unintended discharge and another an officer-involved shooting. First, regarding the tactical unintentional discharge. This happened in the North Hollywood area on the 15th of September at about 4:54 in the morning. Then North Hollywood patrol officers responded to a radio call and a 10900 block of Bluffside Drive. This is a multi-storied large apartment complex. They were there for an assault with a deadly weapon radio call involving a suspect who was reportedly armed with a gun. It was unclear at the time whether or not the individual was still inside his residence. And as such, officers had staged on the interior hallway outside of a door while waiting to learn if SWAT would respond. In the intervening minutes, an officer standing near the door of the suspect's apartment, who was holding a ballistic shield in one hand and his pistol in the other, unintentionally discharged a round, striking himself in the left thigh. Other officers at the scene immediately rendered aid and carried the individual out of the complex. He was transported by rescue ambulance to a nearby hospital, where he was determined to have sustained a single gunshot wound through and through. I was visited that officer bedside, spoke with him then, as well as I did this morning. He was admitted for observation and was later released. He's now at home recovering from this injury and is expected to make a full recovery. Upon arrival of SWAT, they did clear the individual's residence, suspect's residence, and determined that he was not inside. There was a follow-up investigation regarding his whereabouts and a criminal prosecution that will be handled by North Hollywood. Force Investigation Division did respond to this scene and is conducting this investigation relative to the circumstances of this unintentional discharge. The second event is an officer-involved shooting that happened on the 17th of September at approximately 1:20 in the afternoon. Then Southeast Patrol uniform officers responded to a battery domestic violence radio call at the residence located at the 400 block of West 102nd Street. As officers approached the front porch area of the residence, an individual emerged from the front door holding what appeared to be a black assault rifle. Officers immediately redeployed to the east side of the yard to seek cover. The officers gave verbal commands to the individual to drop the weapon. However, he refused to comply with these commands. Instead, he shouldered the weapon and pointed it directly at the officers, resulting in an officer-involved shooting. The individual was struck by gunfire and fell to the ground, still holding the weapon. Responding units formed an arrest team and later handcuffed him without incident. Fire department paramedics responded to the scene and pronounced the individual deceased. After the officer-involved shooting, it was determined that the weapon he was holding during the incident was a rifle, an airsoft rifle manufactured to replicate an assault rifle. No officers were injured during this incident, and Force Investigation Division did respond to the scene and are investigating this. A black airsoft handgun with the appearance of a Glock pistol was also recovered from underneath the decedent. The California Attorney General's office, pursuant to Assembly Bill 1506, is responding and is investigating this incident. They're on scene with our investigators, and their shooting investigation team will work alongside us with the collection and processing of evidence. This is, again, an investigation now that on the basis of the individual holding something other than a firearm and the resulting actions of the officer resulting in that individual's death, that this is the jurisdiction of the Attorney General relative to the officer's actions. The administrative evaluation of the officer's actions will still remain with the department and will be brought before this board for your determination as to the use of force and the actions taken. The individual that was involved in this unfortunate incident is Luis Herrera. He's a male Hispanic, 19 years of age. This represents the 27th officer-involved shooting this year to date. Last year, that number was 25. Our 4-year average is just over 22. The number of fatal officer-involved shootings year to date now stand at 13. The number last year was 10. Given the interest that has developed in regards to the immediate aftermath of the shooting, it is my intention to release the available body worn as well as other CCTV information on this event, the events as well as the radio calls that were that resulted in the officer's response and the immediate aftermath of this officer-involved shooting in a critical incident video. It is my expectation that that video will be released no later than the end of this week, so that the public can gain further insight. I've seen some public reports regarding the facts and circumstances of this, and I believe that the incident, as I've described, having viewed the video evidence of this to this point, and while preliminary, I want to issue this critical incident video so the public can better understand the facts and circumstances as we know them today, based on the information we've gathered. Moving next to our crime statistics snapshot. This last week, we saw a continuation of essentially our violence levels remaining the same as far as the number of homicides replicating last year, but a reduction in the overall number of shooting victims. The specifics on this is that in the last 4 weeks, we've had 35 homicides versus the same period last year where we were 34 homicides. This last 4 weeks, the number of shooting victims stand at 106, with 26 of them happening this last week. That number last year was 118. So we have seen a slight reduction, a marginal reduction in the level of shooting victims. However, the homicide rates remain consistent with last year's numbers, which are still troublingly too high. Year to date, our violent crime numbers stand at a 4.5% increase. Our challenges are we do see some improvement in our violent crime reduction. We're at 4.7% increase last week, but we still see our robberies are consistently a challenge to us with a 17% increase in robberies. Last week, that number was 17.8, and 4 weeks ago, that number was 18.4. So we're seeing a reduction of week after week as far as the total increase in violent crime. The same in regards to our property crime. We've seen a reduction over the 4-week period, but we still remain persistent as far as an increase in overall property crime. So we ask the public to continue to recognize the value of prevention, of recognizing the lock and hide to keep it. In regards to the street robberies that we're seeing, we still see a troubling increase in the percentages of robberies that involve a firearm. While robberies are up, as I said, 17%, when we look at them over a period of time, a longer period of time, pre-COVID, robberies are actually flat or down compared to 2018 or 2019. Those are the pre-COVID years. However, the percentages involving robberies involving a firearm are up 52% from 2019. So the instances of people carrying guns, using those firearms as they commit crimes, whether it be an aggravated assaults, robberies, certainly homicides, as well as other crimes, is our challenge. Our efforts with impacting that is both through the enforcement of those carrying guns. Just this morning, officers attempted to stop a vehicle that they suspected was stolen, and as they chased that vehicle, it we believe purposely ran off the roadway, off the Harbor Freeway, and into an area of nearby encampment. Officers believe that they were fired on by a suspect they believed was armed, pointing a firearm at them. Their actions, I'm grateful that they were not injured. There was not a resulting officer-involved shooting, and the suspect was captured, and we're now searching that large encampment area for what we believe to be a handgun that he was carrying. Just yesterday, at approximately the same time, officers on Broadway Street coming up on Olympic drove into a shooting in progress. Again, an effort to intercede that resulted in a pursuit and the arrest of 4 individuals and recovery of a handgun. So the instances of officers rolling into or coming upon instances of violence, particularly gun violence, has increased. We are working with our training personnel to talk about and remind officers of the critical importance of their safety, of seeking cover and ensuring that they recognize that there are many more guns in the streets today than in years past. And we are concerned to ensure that their tactics are sound and that they're taking care of each other and protecting each other as they seek to also intercede and be the difference and to stop these violent acts from occurring across our city. Last, in regards to our personnel strength, we did see a slight improvement with a new academy class coming into the department. We now stand at 9,255 of our personnel. That's 29 additional personnel from what I reported last week. We still are 205 personnel under our deployed strength, our desired strength, as well as our civilian personnel. We lost 1 additional civilian, so we're now standing at 2,672. That's 33 civilian underneath our professional, underneath our authorized deployment. And I remain available for any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Commissioner Kalancha, your mic is open. Do you have any questions for the chief?
I don't at this time. Sorry about that.
Commissioner Bonner, any questions for the chief?
Yes, a couple of questions, please. First, with regard to the OIS from the 17th, can you clarify again, what were the circumstances that led to the officers being deployed to the scene?
Yes, there was a radio call of a domestic violence incident occurring there where the father was reportedly under the influence and had assaulted his mother.
So there was no mental health element to the initial call?
No, there was no, at this early juncture, I've listened to 2 radio calls that I'm aware of, and it appears that the individual actually who called the officers or to the scene was Mr. Herrera himself. His parents were on scene, and it appears at this early juncture, initial interviews, that there was not an incident between the mother and father. There does appear to have been a conflict between the father and Mr. Herrera.
Appreciate it. The other question relates to, there was at least the one, I think there may have been a couple others, but at least the one student who died after a fentanyl overdose at Bernstein High School, I believe. Can you comment on, what, if any, role the department is playing in investigating not only that specific incident, but just also the broader environment and circumstances around, this particular issue? And what are you looking at only, and involved in only responding to specific incidents, or is the department contributing in any way to any degree of investigation that may be going on relative to supply and distribution and other elements as to, how these things find their way into the high school campuses?
Thank you. Yes, tragically, we lost a 15-year-old young girl that, with her classmate, apparently purchased from another youth a pill that they believed to be Percocet and a prescription painkiller that it turns out was actually laced or composed of fentanyl. When they consumed that on the school site, they both lost consciousness, and later the classmate awoke to find her classmate unresponsive. As she came outside, her father who was looking for her, because this was about 8 o'clock at night, discovered her, and they went back in, saw that the young victim was down. Fire department responded. Unfortunately, she did die as a result of this poison pill, as the mayor termed it. It appears that both these individuals, that this pill was purchased from a subject that we later arrested on Wednesday. We identified him in our narcotic investigation and West Bureau homicide, working with LA Unified School District Police, identified him and arrested him at his residence. He lived there with his grandmother. In his possession was a series of additional pills that we believe, again, were these counterfeit drugs that are laced with fentanyl. The laboratory results on the pills did demonstrate it contained fentanyl, which is an extremely toxic and a highly dangerous drug that often results in overdoses and death. During this time, we also had I believe it was a total of 4 additional victims, and we picked up an additional youthful victim over the weekend in that area. I am grateful that all of them have survived those overdoses and through the consumption of these illicit pills. Our teams and the Narcotic Enforcement Detail, along with the High Intensity Drug Task Force, which is a joint operation between LAPD and the DEA, have responded to investigate the supplier and identify who is purveying these through these students that were apparently selling these drugs on campus and on a nearby park. That investigation continues. In the midst of this, I will say that the department continues through the HIDTA task force, as well as our area narcotic enforcement details, to seize tens of thousands of pills and pounds of fentanyl. I mean, the numbers are frankly so large that I don't want to do a disservice by just talking about one particular seizure, but the seizures are ongoing, frequent, and persistent, and the ready supply of this is resulting in overdoses and deaths of people, of community members, of students, of others in whether it be persons experiencing homelessness or others that believe they're buying some type of illicit prescription pill or other drug, such as heroin or cocaine or methamphetamines, that the drug organizations are lacing with the dangerous combination of fentanyl. So we will continue to pursue those individuals. The young person that was arrested was charged with a manslaughter, felony charge. A accomplice, a person who sold, a 16-year-old who sold another pill to another individual who suffered an overdose, was also arrested for the sale of narcotics. But our investigation is looking much beyond those individuals. Those people are simply pawns that are being used by adults and by drug trade organizations to purvey this death for simple greed of money. And so we remain committed to that, and we'll update you as we go. Lastly, I'm proud of the work of LA Unified School District. They continue to work with us to understand the presence of drugs on the campus. We've provided them with resources to attempt to discover whether there's people storing or stashing, if you will, narcotics on scene on those campuses. We have not found any at that particular campus, but we'll continue to support them at their request when the school is not occupied. Additionally, we are working with the school district, as is the DEA. The number one threat to the country is fentanyl, and we're working with them for an education and awareness for both the student, staff, as well as parents, as the dangerous attributes of buying drugs of any type on campus or off campus, and that this type of incident is all too real.
Well, I appreciate that. I would say at a minimum, I would appreciate some additional information about the task force and its operations and what's going on there. I do think it would be suitable and appropriate for a presentation here as well, particularly since, as you just noted, this is, the largest, if not one of the largest, if not the largest problem facing kids and people all across the country, but particularly young people. So I do think it'd be helpful to have some more information as to not only what the department is doing, but how that relates to others involved in the effort as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonner. Commissioner Decker, any questions for Chief Moore?
Thank you, Commissioner Briggs. Chief, you talked today and gave statistics regarding firearms. I certainly appreciate that presentation, but I wonder if you can describe the efforts being undertaken by the department to inform state and federal policymakers of these patterns that you're seeing and the numbers, the statistics. And I know there's the annual reporting. I'm talking about outside the annual reporting to be sure that they're getting relevant current data about what you are seeing on the streets so that they can make hopefully more informed policy decisions to try and help the situation.
Thank you. Yes. So, and just to update the commission and the public, year to date, as of the end of July, we've booked 5,086 firearms. Of that, 1,244 are what we call ghost guns, or these are privately manufactured, non-serialized weapons. That number, to show you a comparison of the explosion or the growth of these non-serialized weapons, in 2020, the department had booked 813. If you go back to 2016, 2006, 2017, the number was a couple of hundred. So the proliferation of firearms have been both those that have been sold lawfully, and then in the hands of people who are otherwise registered and able to lawfully possess, and then lose them through whether it be a burglary of their car because it's not secured properly, or in a home, perhaps again in a location that is readily accessible. And then the other major provider of this is these individuals who are buying parts of guns and then manufacture them in their shops or machine shops, if you will. It's not terribly sophisticated, the amount of knowledge that's needed. The 80 Polymer organization out of Nevada is one of the major providers of these kits, if you will. And steps have been made most recently with the lawmakers following our interactions with them at the federal and state and local level to strengthen laws to interrupt the supplier of these ghost guns, if you will, the supplier of these machine parts that will allow what they're called 80%ers. It gives you essentially an entire gun, and it just needs a couple more parts in which to add to make that a fully functional gun. And the only reason those guns exist is for people who are otherwise unlawfully able to possess a gun, because you wouldn't want to buy this gun. The quality of the gun is not the manufacturing standards are not as precise as a major gun manufacturer. So you buy it because you can't buy it from anywhere else in the state of California. That's one of the major impacts that we see, both in guns that we pull off of suspects, individuals engaged in violent acts, as well as, frankly, weapons that are being pointed at officers. In that, the state laws have changed, and federal law most recently, that went to interrupt the supplier, such as a major manufacturer. However, this is entirely a cat and mouse game, because as soon as that action went into place at the federal level, we saw manufacturers who then started disassembling kits and selling individual parts, requiring the buyer, instead of making one click and getting an 80%er, they now make 4 or 5 clicks, and they buy subsets, and then they build from there. And because of the way the law is written, they believe that the manufacturers believe that they have skirted or avoided the enforcement. It's really shameful, because it's the only thing driving this, is, in my view, is greed, is the capital side of selling this to provide funds. And what they ignore is a devastating impact this is having on our communities as far as safety. So we continue to work with the special agent in charge here locally of ATF, as well as with our federal partners. I'll be traveling here in about a month's time to Dallas for the International Association of Chiefs of Police, as well as our Major City Chiefs Association. And there will be, I expect to have the major heads of ATF, DOJ, DHS, and others, where we'll sit and talk about the ground truth of what we're seeing, identify our strategies, and work together towards understanding what additional legislative actions, what additional consequences. But let me end by saying what I really also need is continued work by our local district attorney in his prosecution, aggressive prosecution of people who are carrying guns. People who are carrying guns committing a robbery and use that gun as a brandish or point at someone needs to be charged with the added gun enhancement, both as a consequence for carrying that weapon, as well as for deterrence to others. We've seen previous enhancement that when regularly used and known on the street that they'll be used, people avoid the threshold, they'll avoid conducting themselves in that manner, and they'll resort to a different weapon. Frankly, that's where we've seen replica handguns and others, airsoft pistols and so forth, used in place of firearms as a means of avoiding the prosecution for an actual use of a firearm. But at this point, while we've seen some improvement with this, we still see some enhancements that are left on the table that I believe involve violent individuals carrying weapons and using those weapons and creating terror on the streets. And yet those individuals are not seeing the full weight of the criminal justice system. So we need help, continued work at the local level. Again, I'm encouraged by seeing some improvement on this, but I think there's more room to be made. But also, we're not through with our state and federal partners in understanding what additional steps can be taken. Lastly, I would just implore everyone that if they own a firearm and recognize that the rights as an American to have one is that they lock and secure it, that they ensure that it is safely stored so that it does not become on the street through some criminal act of someone else absconding with it.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that thorough answer. I would ask, to the extent the department has statistics on the prosecutions, both past and current, just data points. I would like to see them. If you don't maintain that, that's okay. But if you do, I would just like to take a look at that for further perspective on the issue. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate your comments. Commissioner Briggs.
Thank you, Commissioner Decker. Commissioner Soboroff. No question. Chief, I want to pick up on something that Commissioner Bonner was just touching upon, and that is the problem with fentanyl. Is it the case that we have manufacturers of that illicit drug in this country, or are they being imported from other countries or smuggled into our country from other countries?
The bulk of fentanyl is largely smuggled into the country. It's precursor agents that, the manufacturing is offshore or in Mexico and Central America. It's cheap. It's a very efficient process to manufacture in bulk. But the pill mills, while there's some of that is again out of country, much of the material that's showing here is now being cut or laced with the underlying cocaine or underlying base ingredient, including methamphetamines and heroin. So it's suppliers out of this country. It's not grown, if you will. Fentanyl is not an organic item, and I'm not a drug expert, but it's not something that like heroin that is being raised on poppy fields here in the country. It is instead manufactured through the assembly of ingredients from other countries and then imported here, where it's then used as a multiplier or cutting agent to amplify the impact of the underlying drug.
And are we working with various federal agencies to curtail the smuggling of that drug into California and
Yes,
Los
in fact,
Angeles?
our there's a series of high intensity drug task forces that the DEA, the federal government, has established across the major, if you will, hubs and distribution points for narcotics trafficking in the United States. And I'm very proud that I'm proud of our efforts. It's shameful that we are a major transportation and distribution hub for the country, but we are. And in response to that, we have a task force of officers as well as DEA agents and other federal agents that work, and other police agents at departments that work in a task force mode. And we are conducting mid and high level distributors and traffickers of narcotics through here. We keep regular stats, and I look forward to the opportunity to come and talk and give a briefing on what those seizures are, how the millions of dollars that of trafficking monies that intercepted, the tons of various types of drugs and illicit drugs that are confiscated that would otherwise be delivered into our localities, not just here locally, but across the country.
And last question, Chief, on this issue, and I don't want to necessarily put you on the spot, and we can defer it to when the department has a presentation. But I know that within the past year or two, we've seen a number of cases where officers who are called to scenes with individuals who either have weapons, edged weapons, or guns or the like, are typically also found to have partake or have some fentanyl in their system. Do you know the overall percentage? And again, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do you know the overall percentage of those suspects who we've arrested in those situations who have had that drug in their system?
No, at the top of my head, that's not something that I have immediately available. However, we do look at being an individual involved in an officer-involved shooting if the person's under the influence of some type of intoxicant or drug or suffering from instances of mental illness. So that is something that we put in our annual report, which is available, but not at my arm's length. But we can certainly get that information to you, and it is a data point that we keep track of.
Thank you very much, Chief. At this point, we're going to go to item 2 on the agenda, the public comment period. Madam Secretary, can you please open it up for public comment?
Okay, our first speaker is Q Jean-Marie. Pastor Q, you're on. Okay, we'll come back to Pastor Q. Next, we have caller ending 4952.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, what items would you like to speak on?
I'm going to speak on all of them.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Okay, this is T. Guerra, Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, and I'm reminded of a statement. Importantly, LAPD has become a lab for researchers. This is something that was stated by Craig Uchida, one of the creators of LAPD's predictive policing and the head of Justice and Security Strategies about 15 years ago. And he was speaking the truth. LAPD has and is for a long time been a lab for both tech companies and also for researchers like JSS and like UCLA, both of which have developed and tested and profited from deeply flawed and harmful predictive policing programs, which are also deeply experimental. And I raise this today because one of the tech companies that has used and continues to use Los Angeles neighborhoods for experimentation is Motorola Solutions, which is who Michael Moore is going to be visiting with this November. And we understand the nature of this visit. It is to discuss ideas in product development and see products and essentially come up with even more ways Motorola can develop technology for police that will surveil and incarcerate poor Black and brown communities, all while making a profit and all while using LAPD or Los Angeles budget dollars to purchase that technology for police. So Motorola has benefited from its relationship with LAPD and having access to neighborhoods here to the point where Motorola's salesperson, Hugh McDonnell, referred to the neighborhood of Jordan Downs, where Motorola first tested CCTV cameras, as a testing ground for Motorola and LAPD. So that was how he viewed that housing complex. And Los Angeles has continued to be treated as a testing ground for police technology. And of course, not all communities are tested on to the same degree. It's primarily Black and brown communities, including Skid Row, including MacArthur Park, including the Figueroa Corridor, including Watts and Jordan Downs, because new policing tactics and technology is tried out first in the in these neighborhoods, and we know why. It's because the residents of these communities are viewed as being disposable. And we need to point out that none of this is about safety, the installation of cameras, and the proliferation of surveillance technology for police. It is not about increasing safety in communities or increasing resiliency or any of the other things that LAPD claims, because at the same time, we see a lack of investment in all of the things that people need. There is a lack of investment in schools and housing and making sure that people have clean air, land, and water. Talking about Jordan Downs, since at least 2011, lead has been detected in the area in harmful levels, including in the soil and water, and that continues today, 12 years later. Additionally, as of 2021, high chronic unemployment was also reported in Jordan Downs and in the Watts community. And in 2020, it was reported that 25% of families with school-age children have no home internet access or have to rely on mobile phones to access their schoolwork. So we know there is not a true interest in the well-being of community, because none of these conditions are a secret, yet year after year they go unaddressed while there is plenty of money for LAPD surveillance and technology. Surveillance does not improve people's well-being. Investment in surveillance does not improve people's well.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have W. Blower.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Yes, what items would you like to speak on?
All of them, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. On August 22nd of this year, the publication of study of findings from the American Heart Association's journal marked the first time in medical literature that researchers have confirmed that myocarditis associated with the COVID-19 vaccines are indeed real and can cause death. Right now, based on the Chief Moore's reporting, year to date, your department's at 74% of your vaccinated employees are becoming infected with Omicron and its subvariants. This is current data year to date. I'm not misleading you, I'm not blending numbers from June of 2021 either. This isn't just the trend of your department, though. If you do the research, you will find that heavily vaccinated counties, states, and countries all have high COVID cases that stem from the vaccinated population. A good example of this is Israel. They're a very highly vaccinated population. During the first wave, which was Delta, the vaccinated were infected with COVID 5 times higher than the unvaccinated. Now, as this population continued to be vaccinated and boosted during the second wave, that was Omicron, the vaccinated were coming down with COVID 10 times higher rate than the unvaccinated. Why is this? This vaccine is supposed to protect you. Research is showing that natural immunity is still a powerful weapon against reinfection from COVID-19. Research is also showing between 3 and 4 months after being vaccinated, it wears off, and instead of having an immune baseline, your immune system actually goes into the negative, and now you're at higher risk of becoming infected again. This would explain why you're vaccinated within your department are continuing to get COVID at a significant higher rate and numerous times compared to the unvaccinated. Research is also showing that the unvaccinated with natural immunity over the span of 17 months, not 3 to 4 months, are still maintaining at least a 50% efficacy rate compared to being in the negative as the vaccinated are. There's a bunch of data out there. Please look at VAERS reporting system, the yellow card system, which is based out of the UK, World Health Organization Digibase. They all show that there are more adverse events with this vaccine in 1 year than all of the vaccines combined in the history of these reporting systems. The facts, they're out there. They're even starting to be published in medical journals now. By continuing down your COVID mandate path, you're just weakening people's immune system, causing people to become sick. You're doing more harm than good. Your mandate at this point is all conjecture. It's not even based on science. I would strongly encourage everyone to do your research and make your own decisions. The city of Los Angeles, you need to stop with these mandates before it's too late. And I challenge each and every one of you to challenge anything what I said, because they are facts.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Q Jean-Marie.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. What items did you like to speak on?
All of them, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
I would just like to lift up some issues from the chief's report. Firstly, it seems like we never really address the root of issues, right? As it relates to fentanyl or guns, right? during COVID-19, at the beginning of COVID-19, our gun sales went through the roof, right? And so the chief gives us this report, tells us that, robberies are down, but robberies involving firearms are up, right? So we have a perfect combination of poverty, people losing jobs, people dealing with trauma from a pandemic. And so now people are robbing more, and because obviously there's a root issue, right? So we sold so many guns in this country and nobody ever looks at that. And we have a gun culture, so much so that a young man comes to and it sounds crazy to me that the young man called 911 because he was having a domestic dispute with his father, yet he would answer the door with a firearm, a toy gun, and point it at officers. Something is not gelling here with. Why would he call 911 and at the same time point the firearm, and he knows it's not real, right? So any person in their right mind would not do that, right? So the fact that officers were involved in this particular situation is kind of troubling to me because it doesn't make sense. And I'm going to wait to see what the evidence says. That an officer said they pointed it, and someone in the house, I read the story, someone in the house said that they were telling the officers, screaming that the gun was not real, that it was a toy gun. So it's just troubling to me that we never really address the root causes of issues, like the whole fentanyl thing. We used to say back in the day, there ain't no gun manufacturers in the hood, right? There is no drug manufacturers in the hood. And the fact that these things are coming into the country, it seems to me that we would put more resources into trying to stop all of these things from coming into our communities, as opposed to arresting the people who are now the low level, or the pawns, as the chief would say. Why focus on the pawns and not the one playing the game, right? And so it never really makes sense to me. We put all these resources on policing and all these resources on responding to issues, but never put resources towards dealing with the issues like poverty, issues like all of these guns that we have.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have caller ending 1264. Caller ending 1264, you're on. Okay, we'll come back to 1264. Caller ending 3146.
Hi.
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
3 minutes on some suicide, paychecks, flu, recruitment, things like that.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Well, you got the overdose facilitator. That's Suicide Joe, President Joe. I call him Suicide Joe. Suicide month. I mean, there's been so many suicides since '73. Guy's done nothing. I don't know why you're protecting him. These are crimes against humanity. And the overdose facilitator is none other than the president. So, and the big meetings with the chiefs the chief is going to go to a big meeting with all the other chiefs. He needs a cam. We need to hear all those conversations you're going to have. It needs a cam. So I wanted to go over some things I went over last time, and I didn't have enough. It only gave me 2 minutes. Anyways, it was the low LAPD was starting at 54,000, right? And sales tax is right about 10%. So that's $5,400 gone right off the top, right? $18,000 in rent, that's cheap. $7,000 in food is cheap. $10,000 in gas is cheap. Insurance was $2,400. That's even cheap. So I said $9,000, and it's going to go fast is what's left over. And I said that the Congress makes $88 an hour. That's $174,000 a year, and that's what the LAPD should make, right? They make an adjusted to inflation paycheck The LAPD does not make an adjusted to inflation paycheck. And this is causing problems everywhere, bro, including the people that you arrest and are having mental ill problems and have a hard time paying bills and getting, upset with stuff. Okay. So I figured, what's half of 88 would be about 44. So $45 an hour starting would be $90,000 a year with all the stated incentives, right? So as much as I want to, boost you guys up, what I had said the other day too, what you still haven't done is you haven't figured out how to stop shooting unarmed people. Failure. Shields, almost never used. Failure. De-escalation is like a hit and miss. You don't know what officer is going to de-escalate and which one's going to shoot 17 times. There was an OIS, you were talking about the Briggs, the Brigadometer there, dude, was talking about how many suspects have they encountered might be on drugs. That's why I said, though, the LAPD, every time there's an OIS, needs to take a blood test. We need to know what the LAPD is on. Sugar is a drug. Caffeine is a drug. They're extremely addictive. Now, the LAPD, you know who the problem is the Congress is doing the most damage to the LAPD. The president and the Congress is doing.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Steve Rogers.
Good morning.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
1, 2, and 5A.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Regarding the chief's report, 19 new cases, 13 fully vaccinated. What does that tell us? That tells us that there should be an amnesty for the officers that were sidelined or disciplined that refused to take the vaccination. The president has declared the pandemic is over. The lag time on what's going on with the LAPD, the fewer officers you have, the less fewer crimes are prevented, more crimes occur, there are more victims. Get the officers back in the streets, get them back to work. Where's the transparency and the accountability on this? Are there 1.2 billion reasons why those officers are not back to work? We need more officers. For a city that size, we need many more officers. Much greater number, 12,500, maybe 15,000. So let's get our officers back to work. We need an amnesty. The president said the pandemic is over. What are we waiting for? I'm glad to see that the chief is going to different community meetings and dealing with different communities. However, it really should be based on geographical area, neighborhood watches, CPAD meetings, neighborhood councils, not on identity politics. Enough with the identity politics. Everyone is a child of God. Everyone is entitled to public safety. It should not be a partisan issue. It should be available to all. And can you please post those meetings in advance on the lapdonline.org website? Having them reported after the fact is good to know, but we'd like to know about the meetings before they happen so people can actually participate. And we need participation in community policing. Perception is reality. There are two, but is that true? I don't think so. Reality is reality. Let's go to some numbers. How many homicides in the city of Los Angeles this year? 280 or so. That's one a day. Do you feel safe? I don't feel safe in a city where there's one murder a day. There's only been one police commissioner that reported by a sergeant 2 of police who's retired, male, black. You probably know him. And only one police commissioner you ever see at a crime scene, at a murder scene at night, and monitoring his radio. And that was Commissioner Caruso. Not anybody here that's on the police commission now. Get your radios, get out to those murder scenes. There's no shortage. There's one a day. You should be at those crime scenes, seeing the reality of what's going on. Some people don't feel safe in this city. What's your number? Is it 10 out of 10? Do you feel safe? I don't feel safe in this city. I would say more like a 2 or 3. We were a person running for mayor who had to be burglarized. She said it was 10 out of 10. What is it now, Karen Castro Bass? What is it now?
Okay, thank you. And next we have caller ending 1264.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, what items would you like to speak on?
The chief's comment and also public comment.
Okay, 2 minutes.
Yeah, Chief. Our community over here in the Foothill Division has been neglected for a long time. And of course, I told you about the community policing. We've had no contact with them. I mean, they don't address our concerns. I've had my back window shot out in my car, and my driver window shot out in my car in my neighborhood. I told them about it. Did anybody come out and talk to me or anything or make some kind of presence? No, nobody did. And so I just want to know what they're doing. I have no idea. We have establishments, businesses that are operating that are like undercover. It's like they're saying they're one thing, but they're operating as some kind of drug operation. I mean, it's just all very suspicious. And I mean, it's all throughout Van Nuys Boulevard. I mean, it's crazy. And I'd also like to address the vaccine situation. I mean, these cops have natural immunity. We should call them back. We need them. We don't need to be dealing with this. I mean, obviously, natural immunity is just as good as getting the vaccine. So we should definitely stop that and get those officers back on the job. And that's my comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Betty Lay.
Good morning.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
Chief's report, agenda items, and public comment, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
First off, I support Chief Moore and LAPD. I was pleased to hear that we have an additional 29 officers now on the force after the academy class. That's great. I think 45 minutes is plenty of time to give your comment if you do your homework. Agenda items, I support 4A, 4B, 4C, 4D. And I think this is worth speaking up on. I think the world can be changed by your great examples, not by your opinion. I think that's a lot of food for thought. I thank you and I yield the rest of my time.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Philip Tabby.
Hello, all items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners, Chief Moore, and everyone. Our city is in complete despair with crime statistics that are at a level we haven't seen in a long time, or maybe at levels never seen. Our officers are leaving this department in droves, and hiring new officers to fill the void is failing at every level. Increased hiring incentives are not the complete answer to the problem, and it may not even be necessary. The issues that this commission should address to boost employment and retention of officers are morale and the soft on crime policies like no pretextual stops that are simply putting our city in extreme danger. After reviewing the use of force review for 2021, page 116, I can clearly see that our LAPD officers are not racist murderers, as some say. What I also see, our public contacts are down about 200,000 people, 1.7%. Again, it is the soft on crime policies that are clearly not working. What is most troubling is our police commission, our command staff, our city council, and the media all have been completely silent on the use of force in review numbers. The people deserve to see the truth. You know, while you guys are allowing false narratives from small community groups to guide the conversation, your misguided decisions are costing people their lives. Public safety is a human right, and this department politicizes every aspect. Do you care, or will you continue to bow down to the worst mayor Los Angeles has ever seen? Identity politics is another issue that needs to be addressed. So much attention is put on special groups and not others. That in itself is wrong and racist, and you know it. I really believe this commission and every commission here on out should be required to take a Citizens Police Academy class like the one held in 2017. What a well job done. Chief Moore, you were there at the graduation. How about holding a meeting with the individuals that took that special level 2 class and listened to all of their opinions? And so should you commissioners. Let's all pray that someday LAPD will be the department it once was. Many officers are beginning to go woke and have forgotten about the professionalism LAPD was known for. Chief Moore, your officers need better support and better direction. LAPD also was once voted the #1 in the nation on uniform and appearance. What I have seen lately from a few sworn does not show the professionalism that gains the respect of the nation. Look sharp, be sharp, act sharp. LAPD is #1. Let's keep it that way. Oh, let's not forget about the whole Monica Rodriguez thing. Check out the news article. The city is being sued over it. There's some big things going on. Rick Caruso for mayor. God bless our peacemakers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Elisa Avalos.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Yes. What items would you like to speak on?
All of them, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Yes, I would like to first start off by saying my condolences to the person that passed away, but also to the parents of the 2 young ladies. And I'm happy that the chief is going to come out to the communities and have community meetings, but he's going to have 2 meetings in a church. And not everybody feels welcome going to those churches because not everybody belongs to a church. So it would be important if he would be able to go to the CPAD meetings, to go to the neighborhood council meetings. And how is the commission working with the city council? Because Monica Rodriguez's office is 2 blocks from where I'm at right now on Ilex and Van Nuys at the laundromat. And there's always something happening here on this corner. There's always men parked, selling drugs on the bus stop, and she seems to not do anything about it. Now we have a new pot shop open, okay? That is not okay. Now in Sunland, Tahunga, now there's a brand new pot shop open. So that makes it 10 of them. When in August 1st, someone got shot in the head in front of those pot shops. Now the cops did try raiding it, but what did Monica do? She gave the owner a heads up. Instead of supporting her officers, that she put their lives in danger. And another thing, I would like to say, the officers already have a hard time doing their job, and it's very, they need a lot of mental health support with everything that they see. And what is their union doing about that? Their union should be helping them and helping them to get better uniforms and the assistance and the help that they need mentally, because a lot of them need help when it comes to that. And I just feel that we all need to work together. That's the only way we're going to get anything across. But I would love, the same way that Monica's employees, when she was running for a re-election, that were knocking on everybody's door in the times that they were supposed to be working, why aren't they doing that now that she's back in office? Why aren't they knocking on these businesses and saying, hey, how can I help you? At the laundromat on Van Nuys and Ilex, someone with battery acid put penises on the windows, gang names and everything. What is she doing to support them when she's in charge of the safety committee? Our violence here in the San Fernando Valley is going up. Gang, drugs. There's men at a liquor store on Fillmore. It's in a neighborhood. What is being done? We have to support our community, but we need to communicate better with one another. Thank you, and please be safe.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Andrew Gravener.
Am I on?
Yes. What items would you like to speak on?
Just 1 minute general comment.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so as always, I'm taking only 1 minute of general public comment because there's not nearly enough time more public comment during these meetings. So I'm taking only 1 minute so that maybe you can actually listen to another person or something. So the LAPD is continuing to kill people continuously, and the chief keeps referring to them as officer-involved shootings, but not clearly explaining how the officer was involved in those shootings, and often uses language that seems to almost imply that maybe the person who was shot might have shot someone or something. But the LAPD keeps killing people, and this needs to stop. We need to defund the police, abolish the police, and stop this violence.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have MJ King.
Good morning. I'd like to speak on all items in public comment, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
On the chief's report, why can't LAPD respond to a call from a person in need without killing them? Luis called the police for help himself. Who is the conflict between? It doesn't matter. Shoot first, ask questions later, right? Except that a child is dead unnecessarily. His father was pleading with police not to shoot him, but it was a toy and officers told him to go inside. Shoot first and ask questions later, right? Where's the de-escalation? This is a parent's worst nightmare. His family should be celebrating his 20th birthday, but instead they must plan his funeral, senseless and preventable. When it comes to students consuming fentanyl, how traumatized all the students involved must be. What's being offered to this student charged with felony manslaughter? They're just kids, not hardened criminals. Where did this kid get the drugs from? Like Pastor Q said, if we don't address the root of the issue, we're failing our youth. When Chief Moore spoke on calling the DA to more aggressively prosecute crimes with guns and fully utilizing enhancements, gun enhancements serve no meaningful deterrence purpose. Research has shown that the threat of extremely long sentences do little to deter someone from causing harm. Deterrence is only effective on the front end, keeping guns out of people's hands, not on the back end with the threat of a life sentence. 40% of those incarcerated in California have a gun enhancement. Has that made California more safe and free of gun violence? There are more than 100 sentencing enhancements in the books across California's penal code. However, there's no compelling evidence that these enhancements improve public safety. While initial incarceration prevents crime through incapacitation, research, evidence, proof, shows that each additional sentence year can cause a 4 to 7% increase in recidivism due to impact of trauma exposure, and that excessive sentences don't lead to rehabilitation. I'm happy to send you the literature on those if you care to get your facts straight. This is why there's mistrust in the LAPD in our community. When you make these accusations, it suggests that you aren't interested in addressing the root of crime or truly keeping our community safe. I yield the rest of my time.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have caller ending 0682.
Good morning.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
All of them, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
All right. I'm just curious as to every time there's a shooting, there's always saying that there are mental health issues, but I never hear anybody talking about technology that we have that alter a person's behavior or a person's emotions. There are over 20-something patents with this type of technology. In 2013, Barack Obama, then President Barack Obama, brought attention to neuroscience and neurotechnologies used by law enforcement and in the criminal justice system. This is technology that law enforcement has access to that alters a person's behavior. Every time there's a shooting, there's brought up about mental issues. They even enacted or cited 4 new laws in regards to this. And this was the Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues. It said, right to cognitive liberty, right to mental privacy, right to mental integrity, and right to psychological continuity. Why would they have to bring these laws that they said will be needed in the coming decades? They knew that there will be abuses with this technology. And I believe that we are seeing that now. All of these guns, all of these people that are doing, why would a person call the police and then show up at the door with a fake gun? That's not normal. Like the Reverend said, that's not normal. Just like all of this stuff that's being done out here, all of these crimes, everything in crime has gone up. What hasn't gone up is the arrest and the stoppage of all these drugs. This is ridiculous. Something needs to be done. These issues need to be addressed. We're not even going to speak on the mass shootings. Guns have been in existence for years, back in cowboy days. How long have we been seeing, or when did mass shootings and random shootings begin? Within the last 20, 30 years? When this technology was first being tested on American citizens? This is ridiculous and something needs to be done. This needs to be investigated. I yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have T.
Hello,
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
all of them.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Power and strength to the families impacted by police violence. Thou shalt not kill. You know, we're given some simple commandments as human beings, you know, for morality and integrity. Yet we can't even, this commission we are constantly calling y'all about the evil y'all commit. And you brush human life off like it's nothing. And again, I'm going to be the third person to say that the pastor is absolutely correct. We fail the people that are running this circus and this shit show here in this so-called country on stolen land are the root of the problem is failed to be addressed. The police have been deeply involved in drug trafficking, human trafficking, sex trafficking, prostitution, drug dealing, weapons dealing. What happened to the guns that were stolen from y'all and your own officers were involved? Pharmaceutical companies, gun manufacturers. You know, these things are being addressed because y'all want to keep this circus and this shit show going. You don't care that there's homeless on the street. There's a drug epidemic going on because of the poverty, because y'all are eating up our budget. 3.8 billion a year, 8 million a day, and there's no funding. People are getting on talking about the president, the mayor, you know, advocating for candidates on here, talking about vaccines, all this bullshit. You know, the president actually is for funding more police. The fuck y'all talking about, right? We need to defund it. We need these funds. Y'all are purposely running this shit show, right? You're running this shit show. You're letting people die on the streets. You're involved in the drug dealing, the gun hustling. Don't pretend like the police, the CIA, the government aren't involved in this shit. Look at the 1960s. Look at the crack epidemic. The CIA was completely involved. Y'all want to blame other countries because you don't want to look at your all problem, saying the fentanyl's coming from other countries. No, it's being made right here by the pharmaceutical industries. The guns are being made right here, right? Government projects, the projects. Why are they called the projects? In the 60s, y'all try to dismantle the Panthers, filtering drugs and weapons in the neighborhoods. Y'all know what you're doing. Stop acting like you ain't part of this problem.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Zach Sherwin.
Yeah, I'll speak to all items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Chief Moore's comments about ghost guns included the sentence, and I quote, "The only thing driving this is greed." And it just caught my attention because the chief is definitely an expert there. And I speak specifically of the fact that he retired, took a drop payment, and then came back to become captain. So when that guy talks about greed, it's a real game, recognized game situation. Another thing the chief said, and again, I'll quote, I'm not a drug expert. Neither am I, but I do know that it's not pronounced fentanyl. It's spelled with a Y, chief. So here's a mnemonic device. It rhymes with will, as in if you will, the phrase that you use incessantly in order to sound smarter than you really are. I'd like to flag the moment where President Briggs said, Chief, I don't want to put you on the spot, chuckling at the mere absurdity of the prospect. Briggs, is it that impossible to imagine that you would ask the chief a question that he wasn't prepared for or that caught him even a little bit off guard? I mean, you are literally the president of the police oversight body of one of the largest cities in the country, but God forbid you, oh God, put the chief on the spot. And then the question that you did ask was about how many people who had edged weapons and were killed by cops also had fentanyl in their systems. I don't know, it sure sounds like you're trying to shift some of the blame off of the officers and onto the people who literally had a knife at a gunfight they didn't know they were going to be in. Speaking of a weapons mismatch, the cops killed a teenager, Luis Herrera, over the weekend while he was holding an airsoft rifle. And Commissioner Bonner asks one follow-up question about it, and a fairly soft-hitting one at that, and everybody else just lets it sail by unremarked on. The police have killed 13 people this year, and they caused the death of 2 people while running a red light, and they're responsible for the deaths of 3 people in their custody. And instead of vigorously addressing it in these meetings, the opportunity that the public has to see you interface with the chief, our node by which we can plug in and watch you be the oversight committee, the citizen's voice in police affairs, you just kind of let these shocking incidents sail right by in a week where we've seen you out posting adorable pics on social media about recruiting your family members to join the force. One time back in the days when we met in person at LAPD HQ, a sergeant came up to me after one of these meetings and said, hey man, like, I don't know what happened to you. Did you have some traumatic incident with the police or something when you were a kid that made you so hostile to LAPD? And when I watch the chief give his reports and watch all of you do what you do, I think, what's wrong with that guy? And commissioners, what's wrong with all of you? Why do you seem to find these losses so acceptable? Why do you allow yourselves to be put in this commission where you rubber stamp and paper over and just do what you can to enable what this police department is up to? I'll yield my remaining 8 seconds to the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Christian.
All items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Just calling in to reiterate, we need more police. We need more patrols on the streets. We need more traffic officers giving out tickets for driving recklessly and not stopping at stoplights and stop signs. Thank you for the street racing task force, but we need really tough consequences, such as taking away their licenses or impounding their cars. I pray for the officers, especially when I see them out patrolling in my neighborhood. I want to encourage them with a Bible verse, and let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. And that's from Galatians. President Biden said the pandemic is over. So let's stop with these mandates, the fake harmful vaccines that are out there, and also the masks, which breed bacteria, and there's a lack of oxygen. We need to focus on crime instead of politics or trendy virtue signaling and woke trainings. Focus on the main job, which is preventing, decreasing, and penalizing crime. We need a faster 911 response time. And if Karen Bass can get burglarized, any of us can. And I wonder if she would still rate 10 out of 10 for how safe she feels in Los Angeles. The rest of us don't feel safe. Definitely not a 10 out of 10. I pray not only for the officers' physical safety, but for their spiritual and emotional safety. It really is a spiritual battle, I believe, of good versus evil. I see LAPD trying to do good and prevent evil. Sure, there might be some bad apples, but that doesn't mean the whole batch is bad. And abolishing police is not the answer. It's complete insanity, and only people who like chaos would support that. The root issues to crime, it's not LAPD's job I mean, it's a bigger job for all of us as pastors, as churches, as families, as fathers, as mothers, as grandparents, as neighbors, as teachers. We need to teach our kids right from wrong. Why are we expecting LAPD to solve everything? This is a group effort. We need to take responsibility and thank LAPD for what they're doing. What can we do to help? And going back to that pot shop in Sunland Tahunga, guess what the name of that new pot shop is? Bubblegum. What a great way to entice children to smoke pot. So the responsibility is ours. Everybody step up to the plate and let's make Los Angeles safer. And God bless each officer that's out there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is Karen Purdue.
And Madam Speaker, this will be the last, Madam Secretary, this will be the last speaker.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
All items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
I'd like to begin by thanking all of our officers who protect and serve, especially during these difficult times. As you all may have heard, the pandemic is over, as stated by President Biden and boots on the ground physicians in Los Angeles. Continuing with any more mandates or restrictions on our officers is pure politics and detrimental to public health. I would urge each and every one of you to go on ride-alongs frequently, so you're not sitting in your glass houses like Karen Bass, who felt safe on the scale of 10 out of 10 until it touched her when her home was burglarized. Please don't make the same mistake. Listen to what is being said in regards to people's plea to bring more officers into our communities most impacted by crime. Politicians need to stay out of police matters. Garcetti's words 2 years ago will never be forgotten. City Council and council supervisors have done nothing to support our police and continue with their histrionic narrative. And what has that politics gotten us? A severe rise in crime with a get out of jail free card, gratis by politicians who are falling down, by the way, like dominoes. Corruption, pure corruption. And I'd like to know who is leaking information to the press to the subjects of a search warrant. Think Monica Rodriguez and Sheila Kuehl. Both have openly said that they were given the heads up when the police were to serve a warrant. This endangers everyone involved, the subjects themselves and police officers. And I'll stop by saying again, support our police. And I thank each and every one of them that continues to work during these difficult times. Never have I experienced such vitriol, A, C, A, B, on and on it goes. We need to stop this, and our politicians need to stay in their lane. And no offense, or maybe it is offense, but Chief Moore, get off your knees, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. At this point, we're going to go to item 3 on the agenda, AB 361. I move we adopt the following recommendation for board action. Find that the COVID-19 state of emergency remains active and state or local officials have imposed or recommended risk reduction measures. That on July 7th, 2022, the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health reported that the predominant COVID-19 subvariants have higher transmissibility and the ability to reinfect those who were infected with other variants. The increase in cases has translated into an increase in the number of COVID-19 related hospitalizations and death. The average number of COVID positive patients per day in LA County hospitals has increased from 1 month ago. In accordance with AB 361, this Brown Act body has reconsidered the circumstances of the state of emergency and that the state of emergency continues to present imminent risk to the health and safety of attendees and continues to directly impact the ability of the board members to meet safely in person. Is there a second?
Second.
The motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. At this time, we're going to go to item 4 on the agenda, the consent agenda items. Do any of the commissioners wish to speak on either A, B, C, or D? Seeing none, I move that we adopt the recommended actions and approve all of the department's reports. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion carries. This time, we're going to go to item 5 on the agenda, the Department of Inspector General's verbal presentation regarding the adjudication process of use of force incidents. And we have Mr. Smith with us, and I believe we're going to have Captain Scott Williams as well.
Good morning, Commissioners, Chief Moore, Mr. Inspector General, Mr. Tiefenk, members of the public. Happy to be presenting today. If you'll just give me 1 second, I'd like to share my screen. And please verify that you can see my screen.
We can see your screen.
Excellent. Okay, I'm Captain Scott Williams. I'm the Commanding Officer of Critical Incident Review Division. My presentation today will be centered around the department's use of force investigation, review, and adjudication processes, with a primary focus on the categorical uses of force. First, I want to just briefly provide some basic use of force information to give this presentation some context. First, all reportable uses of force fall into one of 2 categories. They're either defined as categorical or non-categorical uses of force. Categorical uses of force are those which pose the most risk management concerns and therefore require the highest level of scrutiny. They would include all applications of lethal force like officer-involved shootings, animal shootings, unintentional discharges, any force that results in the hospitalization of the subject of force, and in-custody deaths. All other less lethal and non-lethal force applications are categorized as non-categorical uses of force. Now, currently within the non-categorical use of force, there are 2 investigative levels, if you will. Level 1 are cases in which the subject of force is seriously injured, but short of hospitalization. When the subject of force makes a complaint of excessive or unauthorized force, or when there are inconsistencies between the officer's account and those of the subject of force, witnesses, or the evidence. Level 2 cases are basically every other reportable use of force, including the use of less lethal options that may contact with the subject of force. As I stated in my opening, this presentation will focus exclusively on the categorical use of force process, but should you have any questions on the non-categorical process, I'd be happy to answer them at the end. The slide you see on your screen now depicts the basic flow chart of a categorical use of force case from incident to adjudication. Upon determination that a categorical use of force has occurred, the involved command, oftentimes the watch commander, will notify their bureau command and the Department Operations Center to get the investigative ball rolling. The DOC makes several additional notifications, including to Force Investigation Division, who has investigative responsibility for all categorical uses of force. Any employee determined to be substantially involved in the use of force is separated from other employees and monitored by a supervisor until the arrival of FID. This is done to preserve the integrity of the investigation by deterring any possible collusion or tainting of the involved employee's recollection of the incident. In incidents involving the discharge of a firearm, on-scene supervisors will obtain public safety statements from all officers who fired their weapons. As its name suggests, the public safety statement is intended to identify issues that may impact public safety, like outstanding suspects and weapons, the number of rounds fired by officers, and the direction in which those rounds were fired. Upon the arrival of FID to the scene, the on-scene investigation begins. which includes like diagramming of the scene, identifying and collecting all evidence, locating and interviewing witnesses, canvassing for video, and of course, interviewing all involved or witnessing department personnel. These on-scene investigations are extremely thorough and can last several hours. It should be noted that representatives from the Office of the Inspector General respond to almost all categorical uses of force and provide oversight on behalf of the Board of Police Commissioners. In some instances, representatives from the LA County District Attorney's Office and the California Attorney General's Office are present to monitor the investigations. Usually within a week or so of the categorical use of force, FID provides a preliminary briefing of the incident to the Chief of Police. This is called the 72-hour brief. It is intended to identify any tactical concerns that should be addressed during the general training update, as well as any department or community concerns that need to be addressed by the involved command. At this briefing, the Chief of Police also assesses the involved employee's suitability to return to duty based upon the preliminary facts of the case and the employee's work histories. Prior to any officer returning to field duty following most categorical uses of force, they are required to meet with a psychologist from Behavioral Science Services and attend the general training update. Now, the general training update consists of 5 mandatory topics. They are the use of force policy, reverence for human life, tactical de-escalation techniques, command and control, and equipment required and maintained. In the cases of officer-involved shootings, reality-based training via the Force Options Simulator is also required for all officers who fire their weapons. As mentioned previously, if other training issues are identified during the 72-hour brief, the Chief of Police can include them as topics for the general training update as well. Now, FID is required to complete its investigation and submit its report to Critical Incident Review Division within 240 days, or about 8 months from the date of the incident. Once the investigative report is received, CIRD completes a comprehensive review and analysis of the incident and all available evidence to identify any potential policy or training issues associated with the involved employees drawing and exhibiting of their firearms, their tactics, and their use of force. This process takes between 2 and 3 weeks, depending on the complexity of the case. And then after the review, CIRD schedules the use of force review board. The use of force review board is usually held about 9 months after the incident. The board consists of a representative from the Office of Support Services, who serves as the chairperson, the involved person's geographic or specialized bureau representative, a representative from that respective office, so like the Office of Operation or the Office of Special Operations, a training bureau representative, as well as a peer member. FID presents information and analysis regarding the facts of the incident and the subsequent investigation to the use of force review board. The commanding officer of the concerned substantially involved personnel also attends and offers his or her assessment of the incident and recommendations regarding tactics, drawing and exhibiting, and the use of force. After careful examination, the use of force review board makes its recommendations of the findings and forwards them to the Chief of Police for consideration. About 2 or 3 weeks after the use of force review board, FID presents the facts and analysis of the incident investigation to the Chief of Police. During this presentation, the Chief is also presented with the use of force review board's recommendations. After the Chief examines and analyzes the facts of the case, he can either adopt in whole or in part the recommendations of the use of force review board, or he can come to a completely different determination. Following this presentation, CIRD drafts correspondence to the Board of Police Commissioners on behalf of the Chief, summarizing the FID investigation and detailing the Chief's analysis and recommendations. This correspondence is submitted to the Board of Police Commissioners within 60 days of the statute date. The Inspector General also submits correspondence to the Commission with its own analysis and recommendations. The Board of Police Commissioners has the ultimate authority to adjudicate all categorical uses of force. During closed session of the Police Commission meetings, FID once again presents the facts and analysis of the incident and investigation to the Commissioners. The Commissioners review and examine the facts of the case, while considering the recommendations of the Chief of Police and the Inspector General. The commission then renders its finding for each involved department employee, thereby adjudicating the case. As I mentioned earlier, the adjudication areas for most categorical uses of force are tactics, drawing and exhibiting the firearm, and the use of force. When an officer's tactics are determined to have met the department standard, or if they deviated from the department standard with justification, the officer receives a finding of tactical debrief. If their tactics substantially and unjustifiably deviated from approved department policy and training, they receive a finding of administrative disapproval. Likewise, with regard to the drawing and exhibiting the firearm and use of force, if the officer's actions are consistent with department policy, they'll receive a finding of in policy, no further actions. If their actions are not consistent with department policy, they'll receive a finding of out of policy administrative disapproval. In those instances involving a finding of administrative disapproval for tactics or out of policy for the use of force or drawing and exhibiting, the Chief of Police decides the appropriate disciplinary action to be taken. He can order the officer to go through extensive retraining. He can issue a notice to correct deficiencies, or he can initiate a personnel complaint investigation. And when a personnel complaint is initiated, that employee could face an official reprimand, demotion, suspension, or up to termination. Immediately following the adjudication by the Board of Police Commissioners, CIRD forwards the internal process report, which lists the individual findings for each substantially involved employee to the employee's commanding officer. That commanding officer will then meet personally with the involved employee, discuss the incident, the police commission findings, and any disciplinary action ordered by the Chief of Police for an out of policy or administrative disapproval finding. This meeting and service of the internal process report must occur on or before the administrative statute date, which is 1 year from the date of the incident. Commissioners, this concludes the formal part of my presentation on the department's categorical use of force investigation, review, and adjudication processes. You can see it's a very thorough process. It's aimed at achieving the strictest accountability and transparency, and it is rooted in our core value of quality through continuous improvement. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have at this time. I believe Chief Reyna and Dr. Pinnell are also available to answer any training specific questions you have. Thank you.
Commissioner Soboroff, I see you open your mic. Please go ahead.
Yeah. The process you described, I think it's important to point out that as commissioners, making a rush to judgment based on someone yelling at you or a TV shot or anything else is irresponsible and not in line with the process to get to the truth, to get as much information as possible, and then to perform our part is to adjudicate in or out of policy. I think it's, I appreciate how frustrating it is sometimes, well, maybe every time, for various people involved or related to people involved or people who are just highly opinionated, that we don't knee-jerk, that we don't jump to conclusions. But I think that would be entirely irresponsible, wrong, out of due process in a country like America. And I think that your presentation shows exactly why. And it's appreciated.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner Soboroff. Commissioner Kalanche.
Thank you. I have a quick follow-up question, Captain Williams. In Section A, one of the items listed was the OIG response to the scene. What does that entail? And maybe I would ask Mr. Smith, but it was listed on your presentation.
Yeah, I could try to answer it, but I think Mr. Smith would do a much better job.
Perfect, thank you.
And commissioners, we're ready to do a brief presentation on OIG's role within this process as well. We can either do that presentation now or
I'll wait.
More questions, you let me know which order you'd like.
If this is going to be part of that, then I can wait.
It will be.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Thank you, Captain.
Thank you, Commissioner Kalanche. Commissioner Bonner, any questions?
Yes, a couple, thank you. And my questions are going to go largely to context, and so it's not necessarily about the fine points of what you presented, but I'm trying to put the presentation in context, and in part, I'd say because at least I know you're focusing on the categoricals. I didn't see anything on the agenda that suggested this discussion would be limited to that. So some of my questions relate to the non-categorical use of force as well. And which I understand is the vastly larger universe of use of force incidents, if that's correct. And so that was one question, was if that's the larger universe of use of force, then it also can include excessive force. Was there any particular thinking as to what was best to focus on today?
Yeah, it was my understanding that the commission was interested in understanding and having the public also be aware of the steps that go into the investigation, review, and adjudication process, specifically of categorical uses of force. But I didn't want to limit at least the follow-up to that, given that, like you said, Commissioner Bonner, our non-categorical uses of force are much greater in number. So while the presentation itself was focused on the categorical process, I was prepared to, or am prepared to answer any questions you may have specifically regarding non-categorical cases.
Excellent, because I have a couple. Thank you. The first one is about the duty to intervene, duty to intercede, which is variously described. And I understand there's some existing work that's some work that's been done and some work that's being done to get the word out and make sure that everyone understands what the new state law and the department policies require. But can you also, some of the materials that I've seen in that regard, this was that today's focus was on, categoricals, as I just mentioned. Some of the materials I've seen are focused on this issue, duty to intercede, relative to non-categoricals. And so I just want to make sure, is that issue being worked on both relative to non-categorical use of force and the categorical use of force?
Absolutely, Commissioner Bonner. So with the categorical uses of force, it's been incorporated now into the chief's report. So we definitely have a separate subheading that addresses that. It's deliberated by the Use of Force Review Board and commented on for the commissioners reviewed during the adjudication process in closed session. Now, with regard to the non-categorical cases, we have recently started incorporating that into all of our training to our supervisors. So like in supervisor school, watch commander school, command development school, so that those people who investigate and adjudicate, at least at the area level, non-categorical cases, understand that there's a requirement that the duty to intercede be evaluated in every case. We've done that again through those training courses, but we've also published some what we call a TAC Ops Bulletin that comes from CIRD. The September volume specifically is with regard to the duty to intercede and what's expected of the on-scene supervisors who are investigating non-categorical cases, as well as the patrol and area commanding officers who are evaluating those investigations and making an initial, finding determination or recommendation. So it's in the works. This is something that's relatively new, but it is something that we've moved towards education and are evaluating, not just in the categorical cases, but also in the non-categorical cases.
And so this next question relates, following up on some of those points, but this question relates to both that particular duty and also issues around de-escalation. And in some instances, I know that there are these issues when there's a deficiency that's noted, however it's noted, are addressed in sometimes different ways. Sometimes it's through the formal adjudication process that you just described. Sometimes I understand it's handled differently. the key question is when you can just lump all that together. Let's take the example of a tactical debrief or when someone gets some form of counseling. Are those normally limited to making sure the officer understands that they had a particular duty and failed in that regard, and you're really sensitizing them just that very fact? Or do you also have that opportunity to identify situations where the officer themselves has some deficiency in their ability to, like in the case of de-escalation, for example, some officers, have said to me that some people do that better than others because of their personality, their training. Everyone gets the same training, but your personality, your mindset, your approach to the work, some are more effective at it than others. How is that kind of issue identified and addressed? So it's one thing, again, to point out that somebody, was deficient, they should have done something and they didn't. But how are you also at the same time identifying, the difference between somebody who could have very well, easily done it and just didn't, versus someone who clearly needs more training in order to be able to do it effectively?
Yeah, I think I understand your question, Commissioner. So the training with regard to de-escalation is, I'll call it introspective, right? It's incident based, but it's an internal look at the officer's response in that particular case, what the officer did or didn't do that was deficient. And then that's addressed specifically in the debrief or in the training. In terms of like comparisons, when an officer did something really well and maybe another officer did not, I mean, if the two of those officers were involved in the same incident and the evidence was available, they could be shared during an incident debrief or post-incident training. It can be, but we can't really bring in something that's not related to the involved officer's case, like another officer's case, bring that in specifically to address a different officer's behavior, unless, again, the positive example, if you will, authorizes for his or her body-worn video to be used as a training tool. It's something that can be done, but for the most part, the training is specifically focused on the involved officer, his or her deficiencies, and even the good points in their ability to de-escalate, and how that aligns with the department's expectations and the de-escalation policy.
But you take everything you just said, are you also saying that in the particular issue that I'm, concerned with is somebody who knows they should do it, knows they should have done it and so on, but doesn't really have the, the disposition, the everything that they need really to be able to be effective and doing it. And that's what is that person given the training and support, or are they really, is there the focus on holding them accountable for having done it or not done it?
Yeah, both. I mean, there's always the accountability piece, but the field supervisors and the area commanding officers know the officers a lot better than, let's say, I do at CIRD, right? So when they identify deficiencies or just maybe mannerisms or patterns or whatever with regard to the officer's ability or inability to de-escalate a situation, we would generally hope that they would take some type of proactive step to provide remediation before it turns into a formal finding process that comes with a use of force investigation. But in terms of the adjudication of a use of force, specifically regarding de-escalation and the training that comes from that, it would be specific generally to that incident.
Got it. And then my last question is related to something you just mentioned when you were pointing out that supervisors and others in the field would know the individual officers better than you would, say at the CIRD level. And one thing that I've picked up in talking with various officers is there is, to me at least, what it's communicated to me in the questions that I get is a general sense that there continues to be that those issues are handled unevenly and some still believe unfairly. Now, nobody, I think it's a rare case that anybody who's disciplined, welcomes that and says, thank you very much. And thinks it's a great thing. So I'm aware that there's always going to be that unsettledness. But can you, what observation or comment would you make generally on, you presented on a kind of what I perceive as a more formal process, and that's, important. But what is the perspective, whether you or the chief or whoever wants to comment really on this, continued unsettledness that some officers have, that these things are still handled unevenly in the field, and that, some, the discipline and so on is not as even as it needs to be.
I mean, Chief, I can take a stab at this if you'd like, but it's sort of outside my purview.
No, I'm happy to. Well, let's talk about individual instances of use of force or an application that's found to be inconsistent with department training or expectations, or a situation where de-escalation, we determined that de-escalation should have occurred in a more amplified way, and there's criticism. Accepting that or moving over to matters of general discipline. I would say, first of all, your first assumption that no one likes it. Well, you're right. No one appreciates, no one looks to an opportunity of constructive criticism or discipline per se, like, please, I need more of that. We want to avoid mistakes, and we want to avoid the aspects of being criticized. But the vast majority of our people, when they make mistakes, they do own it. And while there may be a period of uncomfortable aspect of it, they learn from it, and they accept it, and they recognize that people are going to make mistakes, and they're not purposeful mistakes. These are errors of judgment that they meant to do the right things, but they fell short, or in an instance of a matter of a lack of training or a lack of recall, they engage in some activity that they shouldn't have, and we're criticized of it. And the severity is such that it requires discipline, not just training or corrective action, sense of counseling, but something stronger than that. The vast majority, again, I believe, lean into that and work well. Now, instances in which people then walk away from, however, simple criticism or actual discipline and believe that, no, this is wrong, the organization has wronged me. That also exists in this organization. And our efforts is to rectify that through conversations and through meeting and understanding. First, there's instances in which we get it wrong. We may get it wrong in the field, we may in a judgment, we may get it wrong at a watching manager's or a captain's level, or even at a chiefs of police level. There may be discipline that ultimately, when we look back, we go, we made a mistake here. We assumed facts that weren't in evidence, or we judged too harshly, or we felt a consequence that in retrospect, we would take a different path. We need to own that, and we do. I visit with officers that occasion that happens. I visit with union leadership. I go to delegates meeting, and I know that my chain of command does as well. The purpose of visiting roll call rooms, of talking with officers in the field, supervisor meetings, otherwise, is to explore this issues of people not feeling they're being treated fairly. Our surveys internally confirm this also. Discipline, the application of discipline, the fairness of the disciplinary system continually comes up with one of the top 3 issues that officers have as to their morale and as to they feeling supported by the organization. To our civilians, to a lesser degree, and that could be the nature of the workflow and the nature of where we find fault with our personnel. Working through that is, I believe, transparency, recognizing people, holding us all as adults, holding us all as professionals, and there will be times in which we fall short, and encouraging us to move forward, to acknowledge when we mess up, we fess up, we acknowledge it, and we move forward, and recognize that the severity of it varies and that it should be consistent. We have a bail schedule, we call it a bail schedule informally, that says here's a host of types of allegations of misconduct, and if found sustained, as in fact that they did occur by the preponderance of evidence on a first, second, third, or fourth occurrence, again, depending on the severity, here's what the recommended penalty range is. And our work is working with our league representatives so that we agree that if you're involved in this type of misconduct, one can expect these type of consequences. Now, the rates of that misconduct, the ultimate penalty can vary because it is still fact-based and individual-based. But this is something an organization, I spend a great deal of time contemplating and working with the organization as internal discipline. So people feel that they're getting a fair shake, that they're being treated equally across the board, that there are consequences that are, if they're severe for them, that they can look at other portions of the organization and find it similarly. But even last, I'll close. As a chief, and I look at the Los Angeles Police Department as this large organization, I also look to other agencies in policing to understand what are the consequences that they see in this profession amongst other agencies, as does the Inspector General, as has this Board of Police Commissioners over the last 2+ decades. to see, are we playing, are we playing hardball where there's a gotcha error? This is something that then Chief of Police Bratton talked about, a sense that you can't make any mistakes. If you make any error, no matter how slight, you're going to be buried for it. You'll never be able to move forward. Or are we very permissive, and we've set a culture of acquiescing to misconduct and wrong deeds? We're constantly moving to wanting to strike that right tone. This commission has its role also as you review my actions in regards to discipline and evaluating, again, whether that is fair, predictable, and consistent. And we're treating employees in a manner that builds, again, that builds accountability to the public, but also nurtures our employees to strive to do better. And when they make a mistake, to learn from that mistake and move forward in a productive way. That's a long answer, but discipline is one of those fields that as we get into, it gets it's nuanced, in my belief.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I would just close with an observation or a point. And I think one thing I think we could benefit from, or at least I could benefit from, is a better understanding how even those in the chain of command, supervisors and others, are evaluated on this issue. So like in a business environment, many times the manager is evaluated and held accountable for how the people they're managing feel about the fairness of their approach in managing and so on. And it's still not clear exactly how that plays out throughout the chain of command. And so that would at some point be helpful. But I also just observed that both sides of the equation, whether you're on one side, you're on the other end of the use of force or the officer being evaluated, I think the formal system that we're focused on now is very important. But I still get this impression that there's this vast sea of other activity, that whether it's the uses of force that are not necessarily captured on in body cam or make their way into a formal review, that still matter, or it could be these other kinds of interactions with officers that matter a lot, whether or not they get churned through the formal process that we heard today. So still something I think that affects both the mindset of the community and the mindset of officers, as you explained. So appreciate
if I might add, I was actually at an area station roll call just the other day where this issue came up. A 24-year veteran working the field as a training officer and feeling that he hadn't been given a fair shake in regards to perhaps some earlier missteps, and the impact that was, in his perception, still had on his ability to work a gang detail or work a specialized unit in comparison to others. And so we had an open conversation there, and in the aftermath, I look forward to, again, trying to, now there's two sides to that. One is an entitlement. I have this much time on the job, and no matter what happened, my dedication, you need to forgive and forget and let me move on, which I would like to support. But at the same time, it's also, what have you learned from those mistakes, and have you been willing to acknowledge them, and have you adopted the desired performance standard? And if you have, then we do need to move on. But if you haven't, then you may not be in a position for us to give you further responsibilities if you're still working at a level that draws us some concern. So it is something that I see as a chief and our chain of command. We do evaluate our command officers, their leadership, their impact on morale, and that in part is partly how they view discipline and how they go about administering it.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Commissioner Bonner. At this time, we're going to go to Commissioner Decker.
Commissioner Briggs, I just prefer to hear from the IG at this time.
Okay. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, commissioners. With respect to the OIG's concern, I think it's very important to us that our process for independently overseeing the categorical use of force investigations that Captain Williams described to you is accessible and understandable to the public. And so I certainly appreciate the opportunity today to talk about our role in overseeing those investigations that were laid out by Captain Williams. One thing I want to just mention very quickly is that our work in this area is something that happens every day. We have a use of force section with a number of investigators who have a rolling caseload of these categorical uses of force. They are always monitoring a number of cases at any given time. It's a nonstop effort, has been for the OIG for quite a substantial amount of time. I'm going to in just a second introduce Assistant Inspector General Django Sibley, who is the head of that use of force section, and he'll describe in a little more detail what our role is throughout the process. He intends to share a single slide that will help show step by step how the process goes. And I just want to mention that that slide is available on our website. It was modified just very slightly, targeted for today's discussion, but it's available on our website at oig.lacity.org, oig.lacity.org, for any member of the public to go on in our use of force section and see what are the steps that are taken as far as our independent accountability over the department. And just the last thing I'll mention is that we have a comparable slide with regard to the complaint process. It's at that same website under our complaint section that shows how the process works. And so people should have access to it at all times to understand what this process is. To give you a little more detail, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Sibley, and we'll both be available for any questions should you have them afterwards.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm just going to share my screen here. My apologies. This is gosh.
Django, I may be able to do. I'm going to give it a shot as you get started. Let me see if I.
That would be much appreciated, Mark. My apologies for that. I had a little technical difficulty there. So I'm Django Sibley. I'm the Assistant IG over the use of force section at the Inspector General's office. Our monitoring role in regard to categorical use of force investigations and reviews is comprehensive, and it covers the entirety of the process from the day of the incident all the way through to the adjudication of the case by the Board of Police Commissioners. So our role begins when an incident occurs. So at the same time that FID is notified by the Department Operations Center of a categorical use of force having taken place, we also receive a notification of that. We have staff who are on call 24/7, who will, upon receiving that notification, respond out to the scene to conduct on-scene monitoring of FID's investigation. Typically, upon arrival at the scene, the staff members will be briefed by FID on what's known thus far and on what steps are being taken to carry out that investigation. Our monitoring will look at those steps. So, for instance, the way that the crime scene is being managed, the way that evidence is being preserved and subsequently collected, the steps that are being taken to locate and interview witnesses, steps that have been taken to identify and collect video evidence, and so on. And we remain on scene throughout FID's on-scene investigation. We may also, while on scene, talk about investigative strategy, what kinds of issues perhaps need to be inquired into during that investigation, with the objective of ensuring that FID is carrying out the investigation in a way that is going to properly serve the subsequent needs of the reviewers and adjudicators, and to make sure that all of the investigative steps that are being taken in a way that's compatible with applicable policies and procedures. Subsequent to that on-scene response, and a few days after the incident, as Captain Williams mentioned, there is a 72-hour briefing for the Chief of Police. At that briefing, FID presents a preliminary overview of the facts that they've gathered thus far in the investigation, and the employee's work histories are reviewed, and the Chief makes a determination as to whether the employee will be returned to the field or whether some other course of action will be taken. The OIG, typically myself and Mr. Smith, are present at all of those 72-hour briefings, and we're provided with the opportunity to have input should we feel that such input is warranted. The next step in our process occurs approximately a month after the incident occurs, and that's a 30-day review that I carry out with Force Investigation Division. At that review, I get an in-depth presentation from the team of FID detectives investigating the case of the evidence that they've uncovered thus far in their investigation. Also present is the leadership of FID and the leadership of Professional Standards Bureau. Following the presentation by the detectives, we will have an in-depth discussion of the work that's been done to that point by the investigators and what the next step should be. The purpose of that is to ensure that the investigation is on track, that all of the relevant lines of inquiry have been identified, and that FID has an appropriate investigative plan as it moves forward with that investigation. So the next formal step in our process subsequent to that would be the receipt of the FID investigation in its completed form, which we will begin to review upon being provided with that. And shortly thereafter, the department convenes a use of force review board. The use of force review board is a panel of senior members of the department, along with peer officers of the same rank as the involved employees. We are present at the board. I have the opportunity to provide input at all of those boards, and typically will provide input at the board. My objective in the board from a monitoring perspective is to ensure that the board has identified and discussed all the issues that we see as being relevant to its review of the case that's before them. Following the use of force review board, and after the chief of police has reviewed the case himself and considered the recommendations of the use of force review board, the chief of police prepares a correspondence for the Board of Police Commissioners, which contains the chief's analysis and recommendations for the particular case. We are provided with a copy of that report as soon as it is signed by the chief of police, and begin our review of the chief's analysis and recommendations. We then move to the stage in the process where we conduct, as the OIG, our own independent analysis and review of the case. We look at the quality of FID's investigation, and we look at the analysis and the findings of the chief of police. And we evaluate whether the investigation's been conducted effectively. And we also look at the analysis and findings of the chief of police and make a determination as to whether we concur with those findings, which we would do in every instance where the findings properly reflect application of policy and training standards to the underlying evidence in the case. In most instances, we will find that the chief has indeed reached appropriate conclusions, or conclusions with which we agree. There will be times when reasonable minds differ, and we will have an analysis that is different in some way from the chief of police. We will prepare for each case a report for the Board of Police Commissioners that includes a summary of the evidence as gathered by FID's investigation, that includes a summary of the findings and the analysis of the chief of police, and that then also includes an independent set of recommendations from the Inspector General, along with any supporting rationale for those recommendations. That report is provided to the Board of Police Commissioners, along with FID's investigation and the report of the Chief of Police with the Chief's findings and analysis in advance of the closed session meeting where the board will hear that case and evaluate the case and ultimately make its findings. We're present during the closed session to provide any input that the commission may wish, to answer any questions that the commission may have, and to explain our analysis of each case and our recommendations for those cases. Following the adjudication of the case by the commission and on behalf of the Board of Police Commissioners, we also prepare a report for the public that lays out the facts of the case, the findings that were made relative to that case by the Board of Police Commissioners, and the supporting rationale. Certain confidential information, such as, for instance, the names of officers or the identities of witnesses, are redacted from that report, but in all other substance, that report will provide the public with the facts of the case and the reasoning that the commission had in reaching the conclusions that it reached. So those are the formal steps of our process. But I would add to that I'm in constant daily dialogue with my counterparts at FID and Critical Incident Review Division to ensure that we're on track with every case. If we see issues, we want to bring those issues to the attention of the department to ensure that it can give them its own proper consideration and so on. And with the objective at all times being that we can bring to the commission an investigation that's thorough and complete, and will give the commission the information it needs to adjudicate the case, and to ensure that the department's own review process has included consideration of the full range of issues that we see in that particular case. So that is a summary of the process, and I'm available to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Sibley. Commissioner Decker, do you have any questions for Mr. Sibley?
Thank you, Commissioner Briggs. I don't have any direct questions, but I realize this may not be the appropriate time, but there's no great place on the agenda to, first of all, thank you both for your presentations, but also with respect to the Office of Inspector General, I do want to just recognize the passing of a colleague and a good friend. I know such events are traumatic. And to all the staff in the Office of Inspector General, I want to express my condolences, as I know everyone here does. And I hope it provides some comfort in the knowledge that your dear colleague was an exceptional individual, a valued public servant who made a difference through her work and her dedication to the city of Los Angeles. So I do want to express my condolences. And again, Commissioner Briggs, I apologize. There's no great place in this agenda to make such an acknowledgement, but I do think it's, you know, important for the commission to be able to do so, and perhaps we can close today's meeting in her memory.
Thank you, Commissioner Decker. I think you speak on behalf of all the commissioners. Thank you very much for that. Commissioner Kalanchi, I know that you had some questions. Do you want to proceed now?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. So I guess you answered the first question I had, is basically the role of the office. And I wanted to make sure that the OIG's office was like following the case like the whole time that FID is there. So I'm assuming that it's like a parallel investigation.
Yeah, we are there the whole time that FID is there. I wouldn't characterize it exactly as a parallel investigation, because we're not carrying out a separate investigation ourselves. Rather, our role is to ensure that FID is carrying out the investigation appropriately.
Got it. Thank you. But I do have a couple of follow-up questions. One, and it kind of connects back to one actually is for Captain Williams about the retraining of officers. I'm assuming, and some of this is like piggyback on Commissioner Bonner's comments. One is the retraining of officers. There's one assigned training person at each division, right? Is that correct?
There's one assigned training coordinator, but generally there are a cadre of officers in every area who are responsible for the ancillary duty of training officers in matters not just in use of force, but in all many other matters.
So once someone is deemed like for retraining after a categorical use of force, are they sent to their division coordinator? I just need clarity around that.
I'm sorry, not in the case of categorical uses of force. So with regard to categorical uses of force, everybody who's identified as a substantially involved person, or anybody who the chief of police deems should attend the tactical debrief, is sent to a TAC debrief, and that generally happens about 30 days or so after the adjudication of the case. The tactical debriefs are held at training division with training division staff, and are tailored specifically towards those categorical cases and all the issues that were identified in the investigation.
Okay, perfect. Okay, yeah, that's good to know, because I was concerned that it was happening at the division level. So that's helpful. The second question is about the substantially involved individuals, and this could be the OIG or Captain Williams. How do you determine, this is like one of the things that I've heard in, visiting some of the divisions, as the chief mentioned, like when you visit, like they bring up a lot of different concerns that they have. But one of the things I've heard from officers is sometimes someone is put in the substantially involved category, and therefore now it goes on their team's record when they didn't, use any force. Maybe they were just there. So how is that determined? Is there a specific rule? Yeah. So for my own kind of education, I guess I'm asking.
So, Commissioner, the way that substantially involved employees are determined is through the application of a policy. The definition in policy of a substantially involved employee is any employee that used force or had a significant tactical or decision-making role in the incident. So, depending upon the employee's level of decision-making or the role that they had, they may very well become a substantially involved employee without themselves having used force. Got it.
And is there any opportunity for someone to appeal that they should be categorized in that as a substantially involved individual?
Not that I'm aware of, no. Although we do go to great care to make sure that they're properly identified. In advance of every case going to Use of Force Review Board, we'll be contacted by CIRD. They will say, these are the employees that we propose to identify as being substantially involved in that case, in the case that's under review. We will look at that. We will look at each employee's involvement and evaluate whether we agree that they meet that policy standard. And then between CIRD and the OIG, those involved employees are agreed upon in advance of the Use of Force Review Board.
Okay, that's helpful. Can I get a copy of the policy just so that I can read it?
Yes, I'll be happy to send that to
Sure.
you.
Okay, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner, if I might, Commissioner, in that you are visiting those roll calls, first of all, thank you and your continued outreach. But as you work with officers or they identify that they feel they've been unfairly identified as a participant, if there's an adverse finding, they do have the ability to appeal that. So that just so you know, just whether or not they're a participant or that may be not subject to negotiation, but if there is an adverse finding. Lastly, this is a part of our team's process so that we understand what officers are exposed to and what their engagement is, as to understand the amount of trauma they've been involved in challenging circumstances. It's not an adverse finding, the fact that they were present in and of itself is not something that constitutes any level of criticism. It's just part of activities that they've been involved in the course and scope of their work.
There might be a disconnect between like our understanding and their understanding of having something in their team's file, but so I think that's important to know. So I'm trying to understand the appeal of the adverse finding.
If I could, I'll ask Commander Harrelson to speak with you. He can give you the details of that process. It is established and one that is easily explained, but for the sake of time.
For any substantially involved individual.
Any adverse finding on any substantially involved person.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kalanche. Commissioner Soboroff, any questions? Commissioner Bonner. I have one comment that I'd like to make, and it's picking up on what Commissioner Bonner had indicated earlier, and it goes to the item of intervention. I believe what the commission would like to see going forward in these reports that are generated by both the chief of police as well as the inspector general is a separate item referring to whether or not in those instances where it would be deemed appropriate, whether or not an officer has intervened, so that we could determine whether or not the officers are compliant both with the law of the state of California as well as the department policy. With that, thank you very much for the presentation. And the Inspector General, as Commissioner Decker so eloquently put it, we are sorry for the loss, the deep loss that your department has suffered recently. Thank you again for a very comprehensive report. At
Thank
this
you.
time,
Thank you all, commissioners, and Commissioner Decker. Thank you for that recognition as well. Appreciate it. Thank you.
at this time, we're going to go to item 5B on the agenda, the department's report on ethics enforcement section integrity test report.
Hello, Commissioner Briggs. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Chief Rimkunis, we can.
Okay. I'd also like to bring up if Captain Balzuto from SOD, has he been brought in?
I'm here. Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Roger, Chief. There we go.
Okay.
Thank you, Chief. You may proceed.
Okay. Good afternoon, Commissioner Briggs, Commissioners, Chief Moore, Mr. T. Fank, City Attorney De La Guerra. I would just like to start before turning the presentation over to Captain Balzuto and the SOD team. Just a reminder to the Police Commission that constitutional policing, policy procedure, and service delivery have remained the focal points of Special Operations Division. I'd like to thank thank SOD for the continued work. They've increased their testing by over 32%, which I think is great work to ensure the public and the community that our officers are out there conducting police work as expected. So I'd like to turn it over to Captain Balzuto for a brief overview of the report and then be available for any questions.
Thank you, Chief. Thanks for that introduction. And thank you to my partner who's with me this morning, Detective Terry Curtis, the officer in charge of our ethics enforcement section. So I'll lead in this morning with the key data points within this biannual report. I'll include a brief analysis of our neglect of duty numbers, and then Terry and I will wrap it up with any questions for the group. Excuse me, apologies. All right, so breaking down our test results for this report, of the 105 total operations, 8 were classified as fails. We had 1 discourtesy-related failure, and the remaining 7 were neglect of duty-related report completion failures. 5 of these 7 were personnel complaint or crime report failures, and the remaining 2 were hate incident reporting failures. Both occurred during Q1, January and February. In both cases, training was the issue, and what we saw is that the officers were acting in good faith in both operations, but identified the scenario as a free speech matter and with no crime resulting in no documentation. We did coordinate with the concerned bureau chief and commands to ensure that hate incident procedures were refreshed with our officers. And other than this, there were no other concerns or trends with our fails overall during the first 6 months of the year. Moving to our pass with comments, we had 19, up from 14 last period. 10 of the 19 comments were for AFDR deviations. This did trend up during Q1 with 7 instances of officers not properly filling out the AFDR form. These comments, again, were provided to the concerned bureau chiefs and commands, and we did see a downward trend the second quarter with only 3 deviations. And examples of an AFDR deviation would be not completing one outright, delayed completion of an AFDR, or an incomplete AFDR. The remaining 9 pass with comments were balanced out between service delivery, report procedure, and code 6 deviation comments. We continue to trend in the right direction with our body-worn video compliance, as we've gone 3 quarters now with no body-worn deviations. As to our attempts, we had 17 attempted tests for quarters 1 and 2. We've successfully retested 11 of these 17 employees year to date, and the remaining employees are pending a retest, and a point of emphasis on our attempts a revisit is always calendared for a later date until the pending test is accomplished with these specific employees. Moving to our inconclusive test results, we saw a slight rise with 7 this period, up from 6 last period and 0 this time last year. 2 inconclusives were related to no activity and a lack of engagement by officers during our test operation. What did trend up this period was that 5 of the 7 inconclusives were linked to inaccessible phone line systems at the front desk. For example, no answers, no voicemail available, voicemail being full, no callback after leaving a voicemail, or the front desk phone ringers being inaudible or turned off. To be clear, technical phone line issues are addressed with the concerned command to ensure phone line system operability, and we evaluate each one of these inconclusive tests on a case-by-case basis. What we do afterward is we test it the same day to ensure 1, appropriate telephonic service delivery, and 2, that we can re-engage the intended test result. Moving over to our test distribution, we tested 27 commands this period, which includes all 21 geographic areas. For the period, 72% of our tests involved the rank of police officer. The police officer rank accounts for 70% of our sworn ranks, so we continue to be well calibrated there. For the remaining rank distribution, testing of commanding officers was balanced. Our sergeant ranks were tested within the historical norm, a slightly higher percentage as we test our field sergeants for complaint intakes and vice policing. And we continue to improve our testing averages within the detective and civilian ranks as we doubled our tests for both these ranks for the period. Of our 105 test operations conducted for quarters 1 and 2, 206 employees total were engaged in our testing process, which is about 2.2% of the department. At the beginning of the year, we did improve on our notification process to our commanding officers on all of our test results. We have received good feedback there. So along with our productivity, as mentioned by Chief Rampunis, our feedback systems are also optimal. And finally, as a follow-up from our last presentation, I'll close out with a breakdown of our neglected duties. So if I may refer back to table 3 within the biannual report, tests by misconduct type. A given test operation can incorporate several misconduct categories. The main ones are noted in table 3. That said, annually, neglected duty encompasses our highest testing category. Neglected duties, as you know, include a wide range of subcategories. And so for this period, we recorded 96 neglected duty tests with a pass rate of 92%. That falls in line with our biannual average. And similar to this period's 8 failures as a microcosm, if you will, the most common deviation historically is failing to complete a report. Traditionally, this could be a personnel complaint or a crime report. But overall, in our analysis, there was nothing irregular from a department-wide perspective that we can report on. So other than that, Terry and I will open it up for any questions that you have.
Thank you, Captain. I'll start with Commissioner Sobroff. Any questions? Seeing none, Commissioner Decker, any questions?
Sorry, the microphone's stuck, so thank you. Just briefly, first of all, thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the work of the team, the increased productivity. I do think that that's important, so I want to recognize all of those efforts. I did have a question in terms of one of the objectives, as stated in the beginning of the report, is to evaluate procedural justice through these objective testing process. And I'd like to understand a little bit about how your tests are designed to evaluate that.
Absolutely. So we have our officer in charge, Detective Curtis, who is very dialed in on how we conduct those, and I'll hand it over to her to describe that.
So one thing to emphasize during our test, when we're conducting an observational test and we're able to observe an officer from beginning to end, we not only capture and evaluate subsequent review of body worn video, but we're also observing the procedural justice and interaction that that officer may have with that public citizen from their demeanor. We're able to observe how maybe they're standing, interacting, nonverbal signs with that citizen, and that's something that we also evaluate for that procedural justice. Their tone, because some of these items may not be captured during the body worn perspective, but we're able to capture it from different angles. And so that would be one way I could maybe answer your question, Commissioner Becker.
And how is that encompassed in the statistics you provide? Is it like is that included in the total pass, whether it's pass fail, or how do you incorporate that?
If I may, we would incorporate that if we were to see a concern, then we would address that by notifying the command. Perhaps in that example that I give you, the stop was constitutional. However, we may see something that may cause a concern that we may then address in a pass with comments and subsequently notify the command and have the command address that concern.
And do you also take a look at, as opposed to say an individual officer, whether a particular division is having more of that issue than say another division, so that the command can address it more fully with respect to training?
We absolutely do. We do have tests designed for specific employees. When we do identify, at-risk employees or employees that do present, discourtesy or the issues that you've mentioned. So we can absolutely design tests for that purpose.
Commissioner Decker, if I can add into that just a little bit in regards to the procedural justice, that's a concept that we've been, working on for the past few years, and that goes hand in hand. That's internal, external, and everything that we do, the expectation is that we're doing it correctly. We're giving the community a voice. We're giving our officers a voice, and we can evaluate those in every interaction. And ideally with the stops and detentions and the amount of work that the folks put in their review, but also the tests where we're actually making contact, with folks out in the field, with our officers out in the field, that is a topic of major discussion, and that can be relayed immediately to the commands. In regards to, what was the second question? Because I did have a follow-up with that. Your second question?
No, my question more is about patterns, right?
All right.
I understand if you make a comment and the command handles it, that seems appropriate for that particular observation or interaction. But what systems do you have to recognize whether, say, a particular division is having more of that issue rather than another, so that training could be focused to ensure people understand the concept and how to improve in this area?
So in our evaluation of all the personnel complaints, our review and evaluation section does do the final closeout and review. So we can identify, we categorize complaints by bureau, by divisions, and we can quickly identify various patterns and trends at a certain command. Specifically our bias policing unit, we have a team that looks at, things specifically, and we can quickly identify particulars in different parts of the city. We also have our team system that generates, when we have officers that generate complaints, we have certain complaints that come in from the public that could be focused in a particular area. So those get evaluated, and we can quickly put those, work as a team here with Special Operations Division, internally with the captains here at Internal Affairs Division, and identify trends and patterns that we can actually test for. But ideally, we do want to bring it to the command's attention immediately. If we identify something quick that is
maybe in regards to stops and detentions. You know, that is something we wouldn't want to sit on. We would want we would want that command and, you know, that team of supervision at that area to be made aware of that so they could quickly, you know, begin to retrain. And, you know, we're not trying to catch people. Like, this special operation division is not about trying to catch people, and, you know, but we are here to ensure that, you know, our policies are being conducted, officers are policing constitutionally, and when we identify various trends that may lead it or see that it's going down the path that we don't want to, we bring it immediately to that area's attention, and then we can work on various tests to ensure that, you know, that area is followed up upon. But we have multiple people here within internal affairs that review that. We talk about it. We have weekly meetings on Mondays that go over trends and patterns within the organization, not specific to operations, not all specific to operations, but the entire department as well, sworn and civilian, where we can identify various things without or throughout the organization.
Well, that was very helpful. Thank you, Chief Rinkunis, and thank you, Captain. Much appreciated. Commissioner Briggs?
Thank you. I believe Chief Moore wanted to.
I would just add, SOD is one element, one tripwire, but so is every area captain, bureau, and office director, and then the REMAC process. So there are several ways in which to draw attention to a collection of, say, discourtesies or or neglect of duties or other minor acts of perceived misconduct or alleged misconduct that is a pattern that we need to bring attention to the command. We do this also on our uses of force on non-categoricals, for instance. So there's multiple tripwires. ComStat process tracks complaints by type and shows year to date versus last year and recent activity. And so those are just some of the means of data points that are just not anecdotal, but actual responsibilities. But the responsibilities of this are not just PSV. I wanted to stress that that's the responsibility of every commanding officer, supervisor through the organizations to look for early warning signs and direct and get training and needed guidance so people are performing as expected.
Thank you, Chief. Commissioner Bonner. Captain, I do have a question for you on table 3. Do you have that up? Can you see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you have constitutional policing stops as the first category, correct?
Correct.
There's total of 33, right?
Yes.
And it says total pass 19, right?
Yes.
And it says percentage of pass 100%. When I do the math, I get 58%.
That is an error on our part. That is a good catch there, sir. That math does not equate. We will make sure we get that corrected.
Okay, and that would be the same for constitutional policing searches, constitutional policing seizures. You'll go through this table again and make the corrections, correct?
Absolutely, sir. Thank you for that catch. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Commissioner Calanche, did you have any questions? Okay. Thank you. At this time, since this report is going to be revised, we'll table the approval of it. And thank you for your presentation today. And we will instead go to item 5C, the department's report on work permit issuance audit.
Commissioner Briggs, the report will be coming back to us with those edits for final approval.
Yes, Commissioner Decker, thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Ms. Sauer. Howell.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I think we also have operations and OCPP joining us. So Audit Division, and it looks like Commander Brockway is here for the OO piece of this particular audit.
Okay. When you're all here, you may proceed.
Is Ms. Sharon Sargent on the call? I don't know if the secretary can tell.
Give me 1 second, ma'am. It's taking a little longer than.
Thank you. I just want to make sure they have an opportunity since it's their audit.
You're unmuted. Should be. There we are.
Okay, are we in?
Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Briggs, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, you may proceed. Hello, Commander Brockway.
Hello, I'm Sharon Sargent, Acting Commanding Officer of Audit Division. Today, I'm going to share with you a brief overview of the work permit issuance audit. This was conducted by Audit Division as part of the 2021 annual audit plan. Anytime a department employee wishes to work a secondary job, they are required to submit an application, one of 2 applications that the department has. One of these is called the Motion Picture Television Filming Work Permit, and this is for people that are interested in working security for movie jobs. All other types of employment require the Permit for Secondary Employment form. For this particular audit, Audit Division looked at a total of 339 work permits. This was over a 6-month period in 2021. That number was about half of all of the permits that were available during that time period. As a reminder, they were looking to see whether or not the work permits were completed, if they had the proper approval signatures, and also if they were electronically entered into the employees' teams. For this particular audit, the report shows that the department performed very well. Of the 9 objectives, 8 of the objectives received a compliance of 92% or above. There was 1 objective that received a 75% compliance, and that revolved around the motion picture permit. Auditors found that in some instances, the CO was signing before the reviewing supervisor. We did meet with OO, however, and they believed that by clarifying the department's policy and procedure, that this could be corrected. Administrative Services Bureau is the other entity responsible for the ultimate approval of the work permits, and ASB, along with OO, are in general agreement with the audit's findings. I have with me today a couple members of the Audit Division team in case the board has any additional questions about this particular audit.
Are there any questions from any of the commissioners? Seeing none about this particular audit,
Can I ask a quick question? I'm sorry.
Yes, Commissioner Kalache.
So sorry. Just a general question, and this might even be directed to Chief Moore. Is there, I don't want to say an official audit, but when there's like a majority or a large amount of officers that have a second employment from like specific divisions or anything like that? Do you monitor that? Is that part of the audit, or are you understanding my question? Like anything that would raise concern when, like, say that if you have a list of the different divisions and a large amount of officers from one specific division are have a second employment. Does that make sense? I mean, that would be a cause for concern for me, but just wondering.
So recognizing that these work permits can come from a variety of secondary employment, including uniform engagements at the Coliseum, Dodger Stadium. There are, these are efforts to augment staffing that's paid for by the venue itself. Or it could be someone's involved in a locksmith or home repair, and that's secondary employment. The employment application and the review of it does include what other activities or whether permits that the officer is engaged in. But on a macro basis, absent any complaints of favoritism or suspicions otherwise, we would generally not monitor the level of officers at a local level that are involved in these types of secondary employment. We review each one on an individual basis and then look for patterns, work patterns, their sick or IOD history, those type of things, in evaluating the suitability for them to engage. Secondary employment is a privilege. It's not. It's something that the officer has to demonstrate that his or her performance on duty will not be impaired or impacted by their participation in this.
Yeah, that's maybe I need to think about it more, but having run an organization, I would know, like, not that anybody in my organization would need permission to have a second job, but when employees had a second job, sometimes their performance dropped in their primary job. So it is something that is a concern, but I get what you're saying. Some of it could be like they're just working the Dodger game, so it's not like another job, but okay.
Again, lastly, these permits are renewed. It's not one and done.
Right,
so
right.
If a pattern of behavior, substandard behavior were to be developed, then we would take appropriate action as far as restricting that permit.
And would that be at the CEO level?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kalonchik. Ms. Sargent, I do have a question with regard. The overview says that the audit also identified potential risks regarding disallowed secondary employment and work schedules that could potentially create a conflict of interest. Can you identify, just for edification purposes, what type of secondary employment would be disallowed?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Some instances might be working as a private investigator or working security at a bar. Those would be a couple examples where the department would view that as a conflict of interest.
What about acting as a brand ambassador for a company, or appearing in a motion picture that a motion picture, film, video, podcast, or social media posting that might bring disfavor upon the department, or might make the department appear in a negative light? Do you look at those things as well?
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that is something that we are currently, as of late, looking into.
I'd rather move that over to Ms. Anne Marie Sauer. That's actually her responsibility, Commissioner, in regards to the oversight. The auditor audits for tests, and they do in the past what's happened, for instance, an ABC establishment, a bar, or a private investigator. But Ms. Sauer, can we talk about this issue of a conflict of interest and or off-duty employment, which brings discredits or impacts the department's reputation or performance?
Yes, Chief. So Commissioner, yes, we do look at that. We do get requests for acting, other type of podcasts, for example, and we ask for more information to determine, is that going to be a conflict? Are they representing the department? Does it conflict with the department's values? So that is part of the review. Is it going to conflict with the social media policy? So that is part of what the initial review by their CO includes. And then when it comes to ASB for final approval, that's part of what we're looking at as well.
Okay. And can you give me a sense of how many of these types of work permits that you've just described have been disallowed, if you know?
That I would have to get back to you on. I don't know right off the top of my head.
Thank you. I have no other questions. One more time, are there any further questions from any of the other commissioners? No. Thank you all for this report. I move that we approve the department's report. Is there a second? Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. At this time, we're going to go to item 5D on the agenda, the department's report with respect to warrantless searches. And we have Director Rhodes with us.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Director Rhodes.
I'm presenting our response back to the City Council, which in sum ask us to look at two things. One would be the department's policies, which could encourage to see whether we could encourage officers to seek warrants rather than engage in legal workarounds. And the second request was to report on the establishment of a policy on seeking consent before conducting a warrantless search. That was a recommendation that was made in President Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force. In response to the council's requests, the department took the opportunity to discuss the framework of the Fourth Amendment a little more robustly than just answer the questions, and to discuss that there were exceptions, as I know most of the commissioners fully understand. There are exceptions which are well established and longstanding and constitutional to the warrant requirement of the Fourth Amendment, and that we believe that these exceptions and training on the exceptions were really more justified than a policy indicating that you should seek a warrant rather than a workaround, because these workarounds, I guess in some ways we differ with that terminology. And in looking at the policies on searches, we included an appendix so that the council can see the numerous policies we have on searches and consent to search. We indicated, and as a fact, the department policies offer greater controls and limitations on searches than the law requires. And we do this in recognition of the need for transparency to build public trust. As to the second request from the council, the recommendation from President Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force indicated that, and its recommendation 2.10 in Pillar 2 on policy and oversight, that law enforcement officers should be required to seek consent before a search and explain that a person has the right to refuse consent when there is no warrant or probable cause. Furthermore, officers should ideally obtain written acknowledgement that they have sought consent to a search in these circumstances. I think as this commission is well aware, the department's policies, at least starting in November of 2020, go beyond that and do multiple things. The consent to search policy, which this commission worked on, one discusses the difference between express and implied consent. And as a requirement, it notes that first, a failure to object to a search is not implied consent. And second, that when consent is implied, an officer shall confirm verbally on body worn video that they in fact have knowing and voluntary consent. Second, the policy indicates that the consenting person may modify the scope of consent or withdraw it altogether at any time, which is an even more transparent and trust building portion of this policy than was suggested in the president's task force. And then, of course, given the passage of time, this should all be recorded on body worn video and digital in-car video, which when the president's task force was written was not as commonplace as it is now. And the department has been a leader in body worn video and documenting things on body worn video. Moreover, the department's policy has a procedural justice requirement and best practices. So with that, that is our response back to the council, and we would request that you review and accept it so that it can be passed on to City Council.
Thank you, Director Rhodes. Are there any questions for Director Rhodes on this report? Commissioner Decker? Commissioner Bonner? Commissioner Clanche? Commissioner Soberoff? I move that we adopt Director Rhodes' recommendations that we review and approve this report and transmit it to City Council. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. At this time, that ends our regular agenda items. We're now going to go into closed session, which will begin at 12:40. Thank you, everyone.
The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss agenda item 6A1 in accordance with Government Code 54957.
it looks like we're all here. Mr. Chief Hank, can you please read back the findings from closed session?
Yes, Mr. President. Commission has concluded its work in closed session. Item 6A1, officer involved shooting 058-21 was unanimously approved the chief's recommendations on a 4-0 vote. Commissioner Silveroff was not present for the vote. The chief's recommendations were tactical debrief for 2 police officer 3s and 4 police officer 2s, drawing and exhibiting in policy, 2 police officer 3s and 4 police officer 2s, lethal use of force in policy, 1 police officer 3.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Hank. There being no further business before the Board of Police Commissioners, I move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone. See you next week.
Bye.